Story 1. We don't answer to our names. The kid wanted to know why we whispered on a search when the whole point was to be loud. We were 40 minutes up Forest Road 19 in my truck, headlights punching a tunnel through the fog, and Tyler had his window cracked because the heater in an old F-250 smells like a wet dog no matter how many air fresheners you hang off the mirror. He'd been on the team 11 days. He still had the reflective vest with the fold lines in it, sharp as a shirt out of the package, and he still asks questions the way a person asks questions when they think there's a right answer and they want to get it. So when we're on the line, he said, we call out. That's the deal, right? We call the subject's name, we make noise, we let them find us if they can't be found. That's the deal, I said, but you told me to keep my voice down till we're actually on the grid. I did. He waited for the rest of it. Kids his age, they've had a whole life of people finishing the thought for them. I let the road do the talking for a while. Fog came off the ditch in slow ropes, and the tires hummed on the gravel, and somewhere off to the right the creek was running high with the thaw. Cow, he said. That's not an answer. I liked him a little for that. Not many of them push. When you call a name out there, I said, you're not just making noise. You're telling everything in earshot who you're looking for, and you're telling it your voice. That's a thing you give away. And you don't get it back. So we don't go handing it out on the drive-in or in the staging area or any place we don't have to. We save it for the grid, where it does some good. That's all. He nodded like that made sense, because on the face of it, it does. It's the kind of thing you can say to a new volunteer and have it sound like woodscraft, like the stuff about staying found and cotton kills and always carrying more water than you think you need. It's true the way those things are true, it's just not the whole reason, and he wasn't ready for the whole reason, and I wasn't in a hurry to be the one who gave it to him. Here's the thing about search and rescue. The volunteer kind, county kind, the kind I've done for going on 19 years. It is the most boring, dangerous thing there is. 95 times out of 100 you are walking a grid line through wet brush at 2 in the morning finding nothing, and then you go home and you're late for work and your knees are shot and the subject turned up at a friend's house in town the whole time and forgot to charge their phone. It is hours of nothing stapled to the occasional worst day of somebody's life. You do it because once, maybe twice a year, you're the one who finds the kid alive. You put your jacket on a hypothermic 60-year-old and you talk to him about the Ducks game until the wheel comes, and you feel for about an hour like your life has a point to it. That's the job. That's the real job. The other thing, the thing I wasn't telling Tyler, that's not the job, that's just the thing that's out there while you do it. My name is Cal Bishop. I run a backhoe for the county road department 5 days a week, and I have since I was 26, which means I have moved a truly stupid amount of dirt in my life. I've got a bad shoulder from it, and a good pension coming, and a wife named Deb who has told me twice that if I die on a mountain looking for some fool who ignored the trail closures, she will not cry at my funeral. She'll just be mad. I believe her. That's part of why I love her. I've lived in Calder County my whole life. It's the wet side of the Cascades Douglas fir, so thick and tall, the light comes down green, ridgelines that run to nothing, more miles of old logging road than anybody's got mapped right, and the kind of forest that starts as a nice family day hike at the trailhead and turns into something that has swallowed grown men without a trace inside of a quarter mile. People don't believe that last part. They think getting lost is a thing that happens to idiots. Some of it is. But I have watched a retired state trooper, a man who did 2 tours in 30 years with a badge, walk in a circle for 6 hours 100 yards from his own truck because the fog came down and the ground all looks the same. And your brain, your good confident brain, will lie to you about which way is out. It'll lie to you with total conviction. Getting lost isn't about being dumb. It's about the woods being bigger than the part of you that keeps you oriented, and about how fast that part quits when it gets scared. I joined the team the year after Deb's brother didn't come back from an elk hunt. They found him. It took 9 days, And what they found wasn't the kind of thing you tell your sister about in detail, but they found him, and a man I'd never met named Emmett Cross was the one who found him. And Emmett came to the memorial and stood in the back in his one good shirt and left before the reception. I tracked him down a week later at the Elks and bought him a beer and asked him how you get into that. He looked at me a long time. Then he said, "You sure you want in? It's not a thing you get out of." I thought he meant the paperwork. Emmett trained me. 19 years. And I still hear him when I read ground. He's gone now, not gone like a search, gone like a heart in a recliner, which for a man like Emmett was almost an insult. But he trained me, and there's a rule he gave me my second season that I never forgot and never fully believed until I had to, and it's the same rule I was skating around with Tyler in the truck. Emmett matters later, when his voice comes out of the wrong place, so he's worth setting down right. He was a small, dried-up man about the size of a jockey, with hands like a snapping turtle and eyes that never stopped moving over the ground. He'd been a faller in the woods before the mills started closing, then a hunting guide, then nothing much, and he'd been doing search and rescue since before it had a county budget or a training standard, back when it was just whichever old boys knew the country turning out when somebody's kid didn't come home. He could look at a bent fern and tell you a man had come through 9 hours ago going downhill and favoring his right leg, and he'd be right, and he'd never once make a show of it. He wasn't warm. He wasn't the guy you wanted next to you at a funeral. But if you were the one lost, if you were the cold gray thing crawling into the brush praying somebody would come, Emmett Cross was the best odds in 3 counties that somebody would. He gave me the rule my second season, and I did the natural thing with it, which was decide it was an old man's superstition. The woods make people strange, I figured. Emmett had spent 50 years alone in the dark listening for voices, and after that long a man hears things and builds a little religion around them so the things have a shape he can live with. I nodded, and I filed it under harmless old man, and I went on giving my name away on hillsides for years, and Emmett let me, because he told me this near the end, that the rule doesn't take until it has to, and if I was lucky it never would, and better a live fool who thinks it's superstition than a dead believer. He was mostly wrong about which one I'd end up. There's a save I think about from my 6th or 7th year, because it's the one that fixed me to this work for good. A girl, 8 years old, wandered off from a family reunion at a lake up on the Middle Fork on the 4th of July. We searched all night. I was the one who found her a little after dawn, curled up dry and asleep in a hollow log, a half-mile from the picnic tables, not a scratch on her, and when I said her name soft so as not to scare her, she opened her eyes and looked at me and said, "I knew you'd come." Not scared. Certain, like it was the most obvious thing in the world that the dark would give her back. I carried her out on my shoulders, and her mother made a sound I'd only heard once before, at Deb's brother's funeral, except it was the other one, the opposite one, joy so big it comes out sounding like grief. I've chased that sound for 19 years. That's the drug. Anybody tells you they do this for the community or the exercise, they haven't found their first live one yet. You do it for that sound. The girl in the log is the thing to hold on to, because she's what it costs to stand on the lip of the sardine bowl and not go down when a voice asks for help. It isn't fear you're fighting. Fear would be easy. What you're fighting is the girl in the log. It's the mother's sound. It's the whole reason you're a person worth being. The thing in the bowl doesn't bait its hook with something you're scared of. It baits it with the best part of you. And the sardine drainage itself has a thing behind it worth knowing before we spend the night in it. Every county's got one, the piece of ground with a long, quiet reputation, the place the old hands don't hunt and don't camp and can't always say why. Ours is the sardine. It's on the maps like anywhere else. Forest Road 19 runs up to the mouth of it. There's a decommissioned guard station near the head. There's a trail, Trail 217, that used to run along the East Bench before the Forest Service quit maintaining it in the 90s and let it grow over, which tells you something because they maintain trails a lot less traveled than that one used to be. People stopped using it. People always stop using it. It doesn't get closed. It just gets left. I looked into it once, the winter after Danny. Couldn't help myself. I went to the historical society in town, the little one in the old Carnegie Library, and I read what there was, which wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me up a few nights. The homesteaders in the 1880s called that drainage the calling ground, and they didn't hunt it, and the one journal the society had, a woman named Alma Petrie, who kept a diary from a claim 2 ridges over, mentions it twice. Once to say a hired man went up there after a lost heifer against advice, and came back wrong in himself, and would not say why, and left our employ within the week. And once, near the back, in a different colored ink, like she added it later, just a single line. They answered it back. God keep us. The Delson boys answered it back. No more explanation. Whoever the Delson boys were, the society had no record of them past that winter. And before the homesteaders, the Kalapuya bands who wintered in the valley below, I talked to a fellow at the tribe's cultural office. A good, patient man who was kinder to my questions than I deserved. They had a word for that drainage that he'd only translate for me as the place that wears voices, and he told me, gently, that his grandmother's people didn't tell stories about it because telling stories about it was one of the ways you gave it your attention, and giving it your attention was exactly the mistake. He said that last part looking right at me, and I understood I was being told something about myself, and I thanked him, and I stopped digging after that. He was right. Emmett was right. Knowing wouldn't help. 2 peoples who agreed on almost nothing about that country agreed on the one thing: you leave the calling ground alone, and you especially don't answer when it calls. But you can't always leave it alone, that's the trouble. Because people get lost in it same as anywhere, more than anywhere, and when they do, somebody's kid or husband or father is out there in the dark and cold and real, and you can't tell a family we don't go up the Sardine. So we go. We've always gone. We just go knowing. Here it is, the way Emmett said it, exactly, because I've never changed a word of it. Out here, we don't answer a voice that calls us by name. The call that night came in at 11:09 at night. I know because I was still up, which I usually am, watching a fishing show with the sound off. The pager did its thing, and I read it off the little screen. Adult male, hunting party of 3, separated from his group near the head of the Sardine Creek drainage around 4 that afternoon. No contact since. Temperature dropping into the 30s. The man's name was Wade Loomis, and he was 61 years old and had a heart condition. His son had mentioned to the deputy, in a voice the deputy wrote down as distraught. 61. Heart condition, 6-7 hours already gone, temperature falling. That's not a good set of numbers. That's the kind of set of numbers that means you go fast and you don't say the quiet part, which is that the wheel we send might be a wagon. I called Tyler because he'd asked to be on my next call out, and because it's good to bring a new one on a real one before he's had time to build it up in his head into something it isn't. He answered on half a ring. Kid was probably sleeping in his boots. I told him where and what, and to eat something even if he wasn't hungry, and he said he already had a granola bar in his hand, and I thought, okay, he might last. Staging was the wide spot where Forest Road 19 meets the spur that runs up toward the old Sardine guard station. By the time I pulled in, there were 6 rigs already, light bars turning the fog pink and blue, and Maribeth Reyes had a map on the hood of her Bronco with a red grease pencil, and that flat, calm voice she gets, the one that means it's bad, and she knows it's bad, and she is not going to let any of us feel that until the work is done. Cal, she said. Good. You've got the drainage. You know it better than anybody here now. Now. Because Emmett was gone. I let that sit. Who's with me? Take your new guy and take Perez. 3's good for that ground. She tapped the map. Wade's son says they split up at the meadow here to push a bull down toward the creek. Dad went east along this bench. That was 4 o'clock. Nobody's heard a thing since, and there's no cell up there, so no news isn't news. She looked at me. Sound travels weird in that bowl. You know how it is up there. I know how it is up there, I said. She held my eye for a second longer than the words needed. Maribeth's been doing this almost as long as I have. She was on the search 7 years ago, too. She knows what you know how it is up there means. when it said in that particular flat voice, at midnight, at the head of that particular drainage. We have never once talked about it in daylight. We've talked about it plenty at midnight without ever saying it the way I was talking about it with Tyler in the truck. Radio discipline, she said to all of us, but she was looking at the new ones. Channel 1. Call your subject, not each other, unless it's traffic. And the little pause, the one everybody on the veteran side of the map knew was coming. If you hear something that isn't your subject, you key up and you tell me. You don't go to it. You tell me first. Tyler leaned over to me. Something that isn't the subject. Like an animal? Like an animal, I said. We stepped off the road at 12:40 in the morning. Search the woods at night sounds like a flashlight in some trees. It's not that. It's a headlamp making a white cone about 15 feet deep and the rest of the world gone total black around it. So you're walking inside a little moving room with walls of fog, and the walls breathe when you breathe. It's your boots finding roots in rock you can't see till they're under you. It's your two partners as two more little rooms of light off to your sides, 20, 30 feet, close enough to keep contact, far enough to cover ground, and every so often you sweep your beam across and catch the back of Perez's vest, lit up like a road sign, and it's a comfort every single time. And it's the calling. That's the sound of a search at night, and it's a sound I'll hear in whatever I've got instead of a brain when I'm dying. 3 people, spread across a black hillside, calling one name into the dark on a slow rotation so you don't all yell at once and drown each other out. Wade, account, listen. Wade Loomis, account, listen. That listen is the whole thing. That's the part civilians don't get. You're not yelling to feel like you're doing something. You're yelling to make a silence you can pour your ears into. You call, and then you shut up and you hold still and you listen with everything you've got for a voice, a whistle, a tapping rock, a moan, anything, and the woods give you back the creek and the wind in the tops and your own blood in your ears. And then you take 10 steps and do it again. We did it for 2 hours. Up the bench, slow, sweeping. Perez found a candy wrapper that turned out to be from a hunter last October, faded to nothing. Tyler found a game trail he thought was a boot track till I put my light low across it and showed him the split hoof. He was doing fine. He was quiet and steady, and he called Wade's name in a good, strong voice that carried, and he listened after, which more than half of them forget to do their first time out. Somewhere in the second hour, I started to notice things, and I want to walk you through them the way they came, small and one at a time, because that's how it always starts up there, and I'd made a promise to myself, to be honest. The first thing was the birds. There weren't any. Now 3 in the morning, cold, fog, you don't expect a lot of bird song, but there's always something in that country if you know to listen for it. A saw-whet owl doing its little backup beeper call, a varied thrush if it's near dawn, the rustle and tick of things moving in the duff. And walking up that bench I realized I'd stopped hearing any of it, and I couldn't have told you when it quit. It's like that. You don't notice the moment a sound leaves. You just look up at some point and the world's gone quiet, in a way that's 1 notch quieter than quiet ought to be, and your skin knows before you do. Emmett had a name for it. He called it the held breath. When the woods hold their breath, he said, something's already decided to happen, and it's just waiting on you to get where it wants you. The second thing was the whistle. About 20 minutes after the birds went off to the northeast high up, I heard a whistle, 3 short blasts, the distress signal, the thing we teach every hiker, the thing that means help. I'm here. Tyler heard it too, and his whole body turned toward it like a compass needle. Perez heard it. And I stood there and I did not turn toward it, and I made the other 2 hold, because a whistle is a good sound, a hopeful sound, and I have learned to distrust exactly the sounds that are too good. I keyed base and reported it, and Maribeth had Team 2 check, and Team 2 was working the exact bearing that whistle came from, and Team 2 heard nothing, blew their own whistle back on our request, and we heard that one just fine, a completely different sound from a completely different direction. The 3-blast distress call we'd heard came from a spot where there was no one. I logged it, and I didn't explain it, and Tyler said, maybe the sound bounced. And I said, maybe, and we moved on. And I saw him file it the way I'd once filed Emmett's rule. Harmless. Explainable. The woods being weird. The third thing I didn't tell anybody. Not even on the radio. Because there's no way to say it that doesn't sound like a crazy man. As we came up toward the lip of the bowl, the fog changed. All night it had been doing what fog does, drifting, pooling in the low spots, thinning on the rises. But up near the bowl it started to move against the wind. There was a wind, a light one, coming downhill off the ridge into our faces, cold, steady, and the fog was going uphill. Slow, but plain, once I fixed on it, long ropes of it climbing up out of the bowl toward us, against the wind, the way smoke goes toward a person who's just sat down at a campfire, drawn. I watched it for a while, and I made myself stop watching it, because there's a kind of looking that invites a thing to look back, and I've learned not to do it up there. 3 small wrong things, spaced out over an hour, each one explainable on its own. That's how it courts you. Never all at once. Never anything you can point at and say, there, that's the thing. Just a slow accumulation of the world being 1 degree off true, until you're standing on the lip of a black bowl at 3 a.m. with your hair up on your arms and no single reason you could name for why. It was maybe 3 a.m. when the drainage did the thing it does. We'd come up onto the lip of the bowl, the sardine bowl. This natural amphitheater, the creek's cut over about 10,000 years. Steep walls, a flat boggy bottom, and acoustics like nothing else in the county. Emmett used to say the bowl was the reason the old-timers gave the whole drainage a wide berth, back before it was national forest, back when it was just a place. The Kalapuya and then the homesteaders both agreed you didn't camp. Sound does impossible things in there. You'll hear the creek like it's at your feet when it's 400 yards down. You'll hear your own partner's call come back to you off the far wall half-second late, so it sounds like a second person answering. It plays tricks. Everybody who's worked it knows it plays tricks. So when the voice came up out of the bottom of the bowl, faint, from a long way down and off, my first thought, my trained thought, my 19 years thought, was the bowl playing tricks. Wade. We all 3 froze. Because the voice wasn't one of us. It had called the subject's name. I keyed my radio. Bass. This is Bishop. We've got a voice in the sardine bowl, down low, calling the subject. Stand by. My own voice sounded fine. Calm. Good. I want that on the record. Tyler had his light swung down into the bowl, into all that nothing. That's him, he said. That's another team, or that's Cal. Somebody's down there calling for Wade. That's gotta be. There's no other team in the bowl, I said. We're the only assignment on this drainage. He looked at me. The fog moved between us. Then who's calling Wade's name? He said. I didn't answer him. I keyed up again. Base, Bishop. Confirm no other assignments in or near the sardine bowl. Confirm. Maribeth came back fast, and her voice had gone very flat, very careful. Bishop, base. Confirmed. You are the only team on that drainage. Nearest assignment is Team 2 on the Loomis camp. That's 2 ridges north, over a mile of terrain. Nobody should be below you. A pause. The radio hissed. Cal, say again what you heard. A voice, I said, down in the bottom, calling the subject by name. The hiss went on a long time. Then, copy. Hold your position. Do not descend. I'm going to raise Team 2 and make real sure. We stood there on the lip of the bowl in our 3 little rooms of light, and we waited. And while we waited, it called again. Wade. Same voice. I want to describe it, and I'm going to do my best, because getting it right matters. It was a man's voice. Middle-aged, maybe. Tired. It had the exact right sound of a man who's been calling a name for hours and is starting to lose faith he'll get an answer. That little downhill slide at the end of the word, that fray. It sounded like a searcher. It sounded exactly, precisely like one of us. If you had played me a recording of it cold and told me it was a volunteer 4 hours into a call-out, I'd have believed you without a second's doubt. That was the thing that put the first real cold into me. Not that it was strange, that it was so completely, correctly ordinary. See, it's a searcher, Tyler said, and I heard the relief come into him, and I heard him take a breath to call back down to answer the way you'd answer another team. Hey, over here, you got a copy? And I put my hand flat on his chest. No, I said. You don't call back. Cal, there is no other team down there. Base just told you. You heard her. I kept my hand on his chest and I kept my voice low and level, which took more than I'd like to admit. You do not answer it. He went still under my hand. Perez had come in close, and Perez wasn't saying anything, and Perez had 8 years in and had worked this drainage before, and the fact that Perez wasn't saying anything, wasn't arguing, wasn't rolling his eyes at the old man being weird. I watched that land on Tyler. He's a smart kid. He clocked that the 8-year guy was scared, and that did more than anything I could have said. Wade Loomis. And then, after a count, from the bottom of the bowl, in the same tired searcher's voice, it said, "Anybody up there? I think I found him. I need a hand." I have run that sentence through my head about 4,000 times since. I think I found him. I need a hand. It's the perfect thing to say. It's the one sentence built to pull a rescuer downhill, off the safe ground, and into the bad ground, because that's the whole reason you're out there. That's the thing you drove up a mountain at midnight for. That's the sound of your one good purpose in life calling you home. I need a hand. Every cell in me that has spent 19 years learning to run toward that exact sentence stood up and leaned toward the bowl. I keyed my radio without taking my eyes off the black below us. Base, Bishop. The voice is now claiming it found the subject and is asking for assistance to come down. Advise it is not, repeat, not one of ours. We are holding. Maribeth's answer was immediate, and it was one word, and I've never loved her more for it. This 54-year-old grandmother standing at a truck in the fog. Hold, she said. Here's where Danny Voss comes into it, because there's no understanding the rest of that night without him. Nobody on the team says his name out loud on a search anymore. We learned not to. 7 years ago, the fall of 2019, we had a search on this same drainage. A woman, 34, day hiker, went off trail to get a photo and didn't come back. Big search. 40, 50 people over 3 days. And on the second night, a team working the far wall of the sardine bowl heard a voice down in the bottom calling the subject's name. Danny Voss was on that team. He was 26. He'd been with us maybe 2 years, and everybody liked him. He was one of those easy, funny, generous kids. The kind who'd give you his own lunch and his own dry socks. The kind you're glad joined, because it means the work will outlive the rest of us. That night Danny heard the voice in the bowl, and it called the subject's name, and then it called for help, said it had found her, needed a hand. And Danny, I wasn't on his team. I was working the North Ridge. I heard all this after I heard it from the 2 men who were with him. Danny said, "That's Ostrander's team. They found her." And he started down into the bowl toward the voice. And his teammates called him back and he said, "It's right there. I can hear him." And he went down into the fog after a voice that his own base had just told him could not be another team. They followed him. Of course they followed him. That's the job. You don't let a man go alone into bad ground. They got maybe 80 yards down the wall of the bowl, and the voice kept talking to them the whole way, kept saying, "Over here, I've got her, hurry." And it stayed the same distance ahead of them the entire time, which is the thing that finally stopped the 2 older men cold, that no matter how fast they moved toward it, it never got any closer. But by the time it stopped them, it did not stop Danny. They lost sight of his light in the fog. They heard him call out one more time, not the subject's name, his own words. He said, "Where are you, man? Keep talking." And the voice said, clear as anything, "I'm right here, Danny." And that was the last anybody heard, because it had said Danny's name, and Danny had never told it his name. None of us ever call each other by name in that bowl. That's the whole rule. And I have to believe that in the last second, Danny understood that. Understood that the thing in the fog knew a name it had no way to know. I have to believe it, because the other version is that he didn't understand and just walked into it happy, and I can't carry that one. We searched for Danny Voss for 11 days. It was the biggest operation this county has ever run. We brought in dogs from 3 states and a helicopter with the heat-seeing camera on it and 140 volunteers at the peak, and we walked that bowl and both walls and the whole drainage grid by grid until we knew every rock in it by its first name. We found the original subject, by the way, the day hiker, alive. On the 4th day, 2 drainages over, dehydrated and scraped up and fine. She'd simply walked the wrong way and gotten out on her own the long way around. She never went near the bowl. She was never in the bowl. The voice that called her name that second night was calling for a woman who wasn't there and never had been. We never found one thread of Danny Voss. Not a boot. Not the vest with his name taped inside the collar. Not the good headlamp his mother bought him for Christmas. In 11 days, in ground we covered on our hands and knees, a healthy 26-year-old man in high-visibility gear did not leave behind a single fiber. The sheriff's office has it filed as a fatal fall with the body unrecovered, which is the only box on the form that it fits in. Incident number 7218. I know the number by heart. Every one of us from that year knows the number by heart, the way you know a bad birthday. And Emmett Cross, who trained me, who was already an old man that fall, Emmett stood with me on the 11th night when Maribeth finally called it. When she said the words, "suspending active search," into the radio, and her voice cracked on the second word, the only time in 26 years I've heard it crack. Emmett stood next to me in the dark, and he didn't say anything comforting, because he wasn't that kind. And after a while he said the thing he'd told me my second season, the rule. Except this time I understood he hadn't been giving me woodscraft. He'd been telling me what happens to people who forget it. It learns them, Emmett said. It listens to us call, all night, year after year. It learns how we sound. It learns the words. And when it's got enough of you, it calls you by your name, and if you answer to your name out here, you tell it that you're the one. You hand it the last thing it needs. He was quiet a while. Danny answered to his name. That's all. That's the whole of it. He heard his name in a friendly voice in the dark, and he was too good a kid not to answer. I asked him the only question that mattered. I said, "What is it, Emmett? What's down there?" And he said the truest thing anybody's ever said to me about the woods, which was, "I don't know, and knowing wouldn't help. And the ones who go looking to find out are exactly the ones it's easiest to call." So that's what I was, standing on the lip of the bowl, carrying, 7 years later, with my hand on a new kid's chest, listening to a tired, friendly voice at the bottom of the fog say, "I think I found him. I need a hand." "We hold here," I said low to both of them. "We do not descend. We do not answer it. When base clears us, we walk back out the way we came, together, nobody more than an arm's reach apart. Perez, you take drag. Tyler, you're in the middle. You're on me. Understand? You do not leave the middle." "Cal," Tyler started. "There's a man really lost up here," I said. "Wade Loomis is really up here, 61, bad heart, and he is our job, and we are going to find him. But he is not in that bowl. Nothing that's really lost ends up in the bottom of that bowl, because there's no way down into it in the dark that a person survives, and nothing that's really a searcher goes down into it either. You hearing me?" He was hearing me. He didn't believe me. You can't. Not the first time. Believing it takes a night like the one he was having, but he was hearing me, and hearing me was enough to keep him on the lip. "Wade," the voice called from below, and then it stopped calling Wade. There was a silence, a long one. The creek ran, the fog moved, and then from the bottom of the sardine bowl, 400 yards down in the black, the tired, friendly searcher's voice called up to us, and it said, "Perez?" Perez made a sound I'd never heard a grown man make. Not a scream. Smaller and worse than a scream. The sound of the floor going out from under somebody. "Perez. That you up there? Man, am I glad. Come give me a hand. I got him. I got Wade. He's breathing, but it's bad. Perez. Come on, buddy." And I watched it happen to Perez the way I'd heard it happen to Danny. I watched 8 years of training and a good careful man go soft in 1 second because the voice had used his name. And using your name does something to a person I can't fully put words to, except to say it reaches past everything you know and grabs the animal part that spent its whole childhood learning that when someone who loves you calls your name, you go. You go. It's older than words, that reflex. It's the oldest thing in us, and the thing in the bull had found the lever the way it found it in Danny, the way I have to believe it's found it in others further back than Danny, back before there was a form to file, back before this was a county, back when it was just a bad place. Two peoples who agreed on almost nothing both agreed to leave alone. Perez took a step downhill. "Perez," the voice called, warm, relieved, so happy to hear from him. "Perez, come on." He took another step, and his light dipped over the lip into the bowl, and the fog came up around his knees like water. I got him by the pack straps. I'm not a big man anymore. I was, once, back when I could throw a chainsaw around all day. But I'm 58, and my shoulders held together with scar tissue and stubbornness. And Perez is 30-something and built like a fire plug, and when I hauled back on those straps, he didn't even feel it at first. He just kept walking downhill into the fog with me hanging off the back of him like a kid off his father's leg, and the voice kept calling him, "Come on, buddy, come on." And I did the only thing I could think to do. I put my mouth right against the side of his head and I said, "Quiet, not a yell, Perez. That's not your name down there. Nobody down there knows your name. You never gave it. Who told it your name?" And that stopped him. Not my hands. That, the question. Because it's the same question that must have gone through Danny in his last second. The one I have to believe saved nothing for Danny, but by God it saved something for Perez, who told it your name. Perez stopped walking. I felt all the muscle in him go from pulling downhill to just standing there shaking. And he said, in a voice that had a boy's voice inside the man's, "I never told it my name." "No," I said, "you didn't." "Cal, I never... How does it? Come back up. Slow. Don't turn your back to it. Come up to me." He came up. He came up over the lip, and I got an arm around him, and Tyler got his other side, and the three of us stood there in a knot on the safe ground with the bull-breathing fog at our feet. And down below us, the voice went quiet for a moment, like it was thinking, and then it tried a different one. "Tyler," it said. I felt the kid jolt. 11 days on the team. 11 days. And it had his name already, had it after a couple hours of listening to me and Perez say it on a hillside. That's all it took. That's how fast it works when it's close and it's hungry and you've been careless. And I hadn't been careful, had I? I had been saying Tyler and Perez out loud all night, in the truck, on the walk-in, giving it away the way you give away everything you don't know is precious until something reaches out of the dark to take it. Tyler, it's Danny. Danny Voss. Remember they told you about me? I've been down here a long time, man. I'm cold. Come get me. You're the new guy, right? This is what you signed up for. Come get me. Now here's a thing I have to be honest about, even though it shames me a little to admit it. That was good. What the thing did there was good, in the way a knife is good. It didn't just call the kid's name. It reached into what it had heard us say, because we had talked about Danny, hadn't we? I'd told Tyler the rule. Other guys had told him the legend around the truck, and it built itself a Danny out of our own words and handed it back to us, and it aimed the one thing at Tyler that a brand new volunteer can't defend against. This is what you signed up for. Come get me. That's the whole religion of it right there. That's the reason any of us drive up the mountain. Somebody's down there cold, and you go get them. It's not stupid. Whatever it is not stupid. And every story that makes it out to be some dumb animal doing a party trick is a lie people tell themselves so they can sleep. It understood us. It understood exactly what we loved and exactly how to use it against us, and that is the actual horror of the sardine bowl, not the voice, the intelligence behind the voice, the patience of it. 7 years it held on to Danny Voss's name, waiting for a night with a new kid on the lip, and then it spent him like a coin. That's not Danny. I told Tyler, Danny's gone. That thing is wearing his name the way it wore Perez's. Look at me. Look at my face. Not the bowl. He looked at me. He was crying, I think, though it's hard to say with the fog on everybody's face. It sounds so scared, he said. I know. It sounds like a person who's scared. I know it does. That's the whole trick. Being scared is the bait, because we come for scared. That's what we are. We're the ones who come for scared. I held his face. But we come with a plan and a partner and daylight when we can get it. And we come to a real person in a real place, and we never ever answer a voice that already knows our name in the dark. Because a real lost person doesn't know your name. Tyler, Wade Loomis doesn't know your name. The only thing out here that knows your name is the thing that took it. You understand? The knowing is how you tell. And I watched it land. I watched the kid get it all the way down the way I had gotten it, standing next to Emmett on the 11th night, the way you can only get it when it's happening to you. He stopped leaning toward the bowl. He stood up straight in the knot of us. And that was the moment I stopped being afraid we'd lose him down there. Because he'd crossed over into the part of this where you know, and once you know, you can't unknow. And that's the thing Emmett meant all those years ago at the Elks when he said it's not a thing you get out of. We walked out. It took us the better part of an hour to go the distance we'd covered in 20 minutes on the way up, because we went slow and we went knotted together and we did not turn our backs to the bowl until the ground rose and the lip of it dropped out of sight behind us. And the whole time, it worked us. It did not give up easy. It called down there in that tired, friendly voice, and it ran through everything it had. It was Danny. It was Perez's own voice, calling Perez, which is a thing nobody should ever have to hear, a man's own voice calling his name out of the dark below him. It tried mine. Cal, Cal, hold up. I found the truck. Come see. And hearing my own name in a stranger's mouth from the bottom of that bowl put a cold in the meat of me that I have not fully thawed from since, and I've had a year. And then it did the thing that nearly took Tyler after all. The thing I hadn't braced him for, because I didn't know it could reach that far back into a person. It used a woman's voice. I don't know whose. I only know what it did to the kid, because he told me later, weeks later, at the tailgate of my truck, with a beer he didn't finish. It called up out of the bowl in a woman's voice, and it said one word. And the word was his name, but not the way we'd said it all night. Not Tyler. Flat. The way you say a teammate's name, it said it the way only one person ever says your name, soft on the front and dropping at the end. The exact music of the one voice that's been saying your name since before you had ears to hear it. His mother. 6 years in the ground, he told me. Breast cancer when he was 19. And her voice came up out of the sardine bowl and said his name the one way nobody else on earth had ever said it or ever would again. And the kid told me that for 1 second, he forgot every single thing I'd said. He forgot the rule. He forgot Danny. He forgot he was a grown man on a mountain. He was a boy in a kitchen being called to dinner, and he would have walked off the edge of the world to get to that voice. And he told me the only reason he didn't take the step was that I had his sleeve twisted in my fist, and I was already pulling. I didn't hear it as his mother. That's the part that keeps me up. To me, it was just a woman's voice saying, Tyler. And I thought, another trick, and I pulled him along, never knowing I was hauling him back from the actual edge. That, of everything it threw at us all night, that was the one that landed. the one that almost worked. It knew, somehow, from a couple hours of a kid's voice on a hillside, it knew to reach past all of us and find the one dead woman whose voice could unmake him. I have never been able to decide if it plucked her out of some grief he carried in the way he talked, or if it can just reach into a person and take what it needs. I don't know which is worse. I've stopped trying to rank them. But here's the thing it couldn't do. The thing that finally told me for certain what Emmett always swore. That it's bound to that bowl and can't leave it. It never got any closer. Not once. However far we walked, the voice stayed down in the bottom, 400 yards, and falling behind, getting fainter, more desperate, and right at the end, right before the lip dropped away, it did the thing that I think about most, the thing I didn't tell Maribeth and haven't told anybody until now. It called in Emmett's voice. Emmett Cross, dead 3 years, who I never once heard call another soul by name on a search in the 19 years I knew him. Because he was the one who taught the rule. His voice came up out of the sardine bowl, old and dry and exactly right, and it said, Cal, son, you did good. Come down and I'll show you where he is. I have thought about that more than I've thought about almost anything in my life, because it means it had Emmett's voice. It got Emmett's voice sometime in the 19 years Emmett walked that ground, calling other people's names, saving it the way it saved Danny's waiting. And it means that on some night after I'm gone, when I've spent enough seasons up there giving myself away one call at a time, there is going to be a new kid on the lip of that bowl, and it is going to call up in my voice, Cal Bishop's voice, warm and sure, and it is going to say, Come on, I found him. I need a hand. I keyed my radio one last time before we dropped off the lip. I don't know why. Maybe just to hear a real voice answer to a real name. Bass Bishop. 3 coming out. All 3. We're all coming out. Copy, Bishop, Maribeth said, and I heard the breath go out of her. All 3. Copy that. Good. Because the last time a team went up onto that lip and heard the voice, we came back with 2 out of 3, and we spent 11 days on the 3rd, and we never brought him home. She'd been standing at that truck for an hour doing the math she'd done 7 years before. She'd been waiting to hear a number. I gave her the number. 3. We found Wade Loomis at 6:10 that morning, as the sky was going from black to the color of dishwater, and the fog was starting to lift off the high ground. He was almost 2 miles from the bowl, on the far side of the bench, down in a stand of young hemlock where he'd crawled to get out of the wind. He'd fallen sometime the afternoon before and done something bad to his ankle, and he was hypothermic and gray, and his heart was doing something his heart was not supposed to do. But he was alive, he was awake. And when my light found him, he lifted one hand about 6 inches off the ground, and he said, "Took you long enough," and started to cry. And I got down on the wet needles and put my jacket over him and my arms around him, and I talked to him about the ducks until the wheel came, exactly the way I've done it a dozen times. Exactly the way it's supposed to go. That's the job. That's the real job. A cold old man in the brush who'd given up on being found, and 3 people who came for scared, because that's what we are, and we brought him home. He spent 4 days in the hospital in town, and he sent the team a card and a check, and he's going to be at the pancake breakfast this spring, 62 now, walking with a cane, telling anybody who'll listen about the night the search and rescue found him. He doesn't know about the bowl, he never heard the voice. He was 2 miles away, crawling into the hemlock while it called our names, and to him we're just the people who saved his life, and that's exactly what we are, and that's exactly what he should think, and I'd never take it from him. He never knew he wasn't the only thing out there calling in the dark that night. Most of the ones we save never know. That's the mercy of it. The rest of us carry the knowing so they don't have to. I got home a little after 9 that morning. Deb was up, coffee made, and she took one look at my face from across the kitchen and set her mug down, and she didn't ask me anything. 19 years. She knows the difference between a body recovery face and a bad night face, and she knew this was neither, knew it was the other thing, the thing I've only ever half told her about, the thing she's stopped asking to hear all of because I think she understands that some of it I'm keeping from her on purpose, the way you keep a hand over a candle in the wind. She just came across the kitchen and put her arms around me, and I stood there in my wet gear dripping on the linoleum, and I held on to my wife, and I did not cry, exactly, but I did something in the neighborhood of it, and she held on until I was done. Then she said, "Did you find him?" "We found him. He's alive. Old guy, bad ankle, he's gonna make it. Good," she said. And then, because she's smarter than me, and always has been, "All of you came back? All of us came back." She nodded against my chest. She was there, 7 years ago. She knows that isn't a question you ask about most jobs. She knows on the sardine drainage it's the only question that matters, and she felt the answer land in me before I said it. The way you feel the difference between a phone that's about to ring with bad news and a phone that's just a phone. All of us came back. I said again, mostly to hear it, and she said, "Okay," and she made me eat eggs and go to bed, and I slept until dark, and I did not dream, which is its own small mercy, and I'll take it. She never once said the word bowl. We've been not saying it for 7 years. It's the biggest thing in our marriage that we've agreed to leave in the dark, and I think that's right. I think there are things a good marriage protects each other from more than it shares, and the exact shape of what stood at the bottom of the sardine bowl calling my name is one of them. She lets me carry it. That's the gift. Some nights she just reaches over in the dark and puts her hand flat on my chest, the same place I put my hand on Perez, on Tyler, and she doesn't say anything. And I understand that she's telling me the same thing I told them. You're here. You're the real one. Don't answer anything that says otherwise. Perez left the team that spring. I want to be honest about that too, because it's part of the price, and pretending otherwise would be a lie of the comfortable kind Emmett never told me. He came to 2 more trainings and then he stopped coming, and I drove out to his place and sat on his porch with him, and neither of us said the real thing for the better part of an hour. Then he told me he still heard it. Not up on the mountain at home. In the quiet parts of his own house, doing dishes, half asleep, he'd hear that tired, friendly voice say, "Perez, come on, buddy." And he'd have to stop and put his hands flat on the counter and wait for it to pass. He said he couldn't do the work anymore because he no longer trusted his own ears, and a searcher who can't trust his own ears is a danger to everybody roped to him, and he was right. And I told him he was right, and I have never respected a man more for quitting a thing. He took a step downhill that night, and I got him by the pack straps, and most of him came back up the hill with me. Most of him. That's the honest count. The bowl doesn't always take all of you at once. Sometimes it just keeps a piece and calls it in slow, over years, in a voice you gave away one night without knowing it was the only thing you had that couldn't be replaced. He's all right now, mostly. Drives a propane truck. Doesn't go up past the pavement anymore, not for anything. I don't blame him, and I don't try to talk him back. Some people the mountain gives back whole, and some it gives back with a piece missing, and there's no telling in advance which you'll be. And anybody who signs up for this ought to know that going in, even though not one of us would have listened at the start. Tyler stayed on the team. I half thought he wouldn't. A lot of them don't, after a bad one, and that was a bad one. And he had every right to hang up the vest and go find a hobby that doesn't include a hillside where the dark knows your name. But he came to the next training, and the one after, and this spring he made Tracker, which is fast, which is Emmett fast. And last month I stood next to him at staging for a call-out up a different drainage. A good one, a lost kid, found alive by noon. The kind that reminds you why, and I heard him tell a brand new volunteer, a girl maybe 19, why we keep our voices down on the drive-in. When you call a name out there, he told her, you're not just making noise, you're telling everything in earshot who you're looking for. And you're telling it your voice. That's a thing you give away, and you don't get it back. Word for word. The Woodscraft version. The one you can say to a new one and have it sound like cotton kills and carry more water than you think. He didn't give her the other version, the whole version, the Emmett version, and he was right not to. You can't give somebody that until it's happening to them. You just plant the rule and hope it holds when the night comes that it has to. She nodded, the way they nod, like there's a right answer and she wants to get it. And I stood there in the gray morning at the edge of a different woods, and I thought about how it goes on. How Emmett gave it to me and I gave it to Tyler, and Tyler will give it to the girl, and someday the girl will give it to some kid not born yet. This rule handed down a link at a time. And how not one of them will fully believe it until the night the bottom of some bowl calls up in a friendly, tired, familiar voice and asks them, please, to come down and lend a hand. I still run the sardine drainage when there's a search there. Somebody has to, and I know it better than anybody left. I go up onto the lip, and I do the work, and I call for whoever's lost, real and loud, the way you're supposed to, out into the black, where it does some good. But I don't say the other searchers' names up there anymore. Not on the walk-in, not at staging, not anywhere the bowl can hear. We use numbers now. Team assignments, unit numbers, that's it. Marbeth made it policy after that night, and nobody asked her why, and she never wrote down the reason. On the sardine drainage, you're a number. You leave your name in the truck, because it's still down there. It's patient, and it's not stupid, and it's got Danny's voice and Emmett's voice, and on some night I won't be around for it, it'll have mine. And when it calls up out of the fog in Cal Bishop's voice, warm and sure, and tells some new kid on the lip that I found him, I need a hand. I need whoever's standing next to that kid to put a hand flat on his chest and say the thing. Say it low. Say it sure. We don't answer to our names out here. Not ever. Not even mine. Story 2. The dog that wouldn't go down. Boone found the boot at the edge of the beaver flat, and then he did the thing he'd never once done in 6 years of working, which was lie to me. Or that's what I thought at the time. I've since come around on it. But standing there in the last of the light with the mud sucking at my boots and a 9-year-old somewhere out in all that black water, I thought my dog had lied to me. And it scared me worse than the missing kid did. The boot's the first thing that was wrong, and I didn't clock it right away. It was a kid's boot. Little rubber and nylon hiker. The kind you get at the farm store for $20. And it was sitting upright on a hummock of grass at the edge of where the solid ground quit and the flooded timber began. Upright. Not on its side, not half sunk, not tossed. Sitting there neat as a thing on a shoe rack, laces still tied, toe pointed out toward the water like somebody had set it down to mark a spot. Boone put his nose on it and his whole body changed the way it does on a real find, that hard fast intake, that stiffening, and I keyed my radio and said, Base Kessler, I've got an article. Child's boot, right size, at the north edge of the flat, and I got down to flag it and take my bearing, and that's when Boone quit. He didn't alert into the water. That's the part I want to make clear, because it matters for everything after. An air-scent dog works the wind. He's not tracking footprints. He's reading the cone of human smell that comes off a person and drifts downwind. And when he hits that cone, he follows it up to the source and tells you, and Boone's tell was to run back to me and jump up and then lead me in, over and over. The happiest thing in the world. Look what I found. Look. Come on. 6 years. 14 live finds. He had never been wrong about the direction of a person in his life. And there was a person out there. That part matters just as much. A little boy named Cody Vandermeer, 9 years old, had walked away from his grandfather's property on the south side of the flat sometime that afternoon, and there was no question he was real and out there and in trouble, because it was going down into the 40s, and there was standing water everywhere, and he had a jacket but not the right one. That was the whole reason 40 of us were spread across that country as the sun went. He was real. The boot was probably his. The situation was as real and as bad as they come. But when I stepped toward the water to work the article, Boone got in front of me, not beside me. In front. He put his body between me and the flooded timber, and he sat down on my feet. which is a thing he was trained to do at the edge of a cliff, at the lip of a drop, at any hard hazard he wanted me to stop and see. Avalanche dogs do it. Water dogs do it. It means, no further, not this way, there is a thing here that kills. I had felt him do it maybe 3 times in his career, and every time there'd been a reason, a snow cornice once, an old mine at it hidden in Salal another time. He sat on my feet at the edge of the beaver flat, and he leaned his weight back into me, and he would not let me toward the water, and out across that black flooded timber, somewhere in the drowned trees. A child started crying for help. My name's Renata Kessler. Everybody calls me Ren except my mother, who's gone now, and the DMV. I am 46 years old. I clean teeth for a living dental hygienist. 22 years, same practice, and on my own time I run a dog for Calder County Search and Rescue, which is a thing I fell into the way you fall into the deep end, which is to say a little on purpose and a lot by accident. It's a strange double life, and I've never gotten used to the seam in it. Monday, I'm in scrubs with a little paper bib chain in my hand, telling somebody they've got to floss the back ones too. The radio in the operatory playing soft rock, everything clean and lit and smelling like mint and latex. And then the pager goes some Tuesday night, and by midnight I'm chest deep in a decision that a man's life hangs on in country so dark and so old it doesn't care whether I exist. Nobody at the office really knows what I do. You know, I do search and rescue. They think it's cute. They think it's me and a nice dog finding lost hikers and getting my picture in the little county paper, which happens. That part's real. What they don't know is the other part. You can't tell them the other part. I tried once, years ago, told a coworker a soft version of a bad night, and I watched her face do the thing faces do, the polite backing away, and I never tried again. So I carry it the way everybody on the team carries it, in a compartment that doesn't open at work, and I clean teeth, and I wait for the pager, and I live in both worlds and belong all the way to neither. I've got 2 boys, grown and gone now. One's a diesel mechanic down in the valley. One's in the guard, and a husband named Rick who drives long haul and is gone half the month and has made his peace, more or less, with a wife who gets out of a warm bed at midnight to go walk a swamp. He worries. He doesn't say much about it, but he sleeps bad the nights I'm out, and he always has coffee going when I come in at dawn, no matter the hour. And that's a man saying, I was scared for you, without having the words. And I love him for it the way Cal Bishop loves his Deb for, the same wordless thing, though I didn't know Cal well yet the night of the soaks. I know him now. There's a small handful of us in this county who know each other in a way you can't explain to anybody who hasn't stood where we've stood, and Cal's one and Maribeth's one, and there aren't many others. And it isn't a club anybody wanted to join. I've got 2 dogs. I've got 1 dog now, and I'll get to that. Boone was the second one. He's a German Shepherd, sable, big through the chest, with one ear that never fully stood up, so he always looked like he was asking a question. My first dog was a shepherd too, a female named Greta, and Greta's the one who got me into this. She found a downed hiker, my 3rd year, of just walking her in the woods for fun. Walked me right to a man with a broken hip who'd been down 2 days, and after that a woman from the county SAR team found me and said, "You know what you've got there?" And I said no, and she said, "You've got a search dog that nobody trained. Come find out what she can do with somebody who knows how." That was Maribeth Reyes, who ran the team then and runs it still, and I've been under her going on 19 years. You get close to a dog you work with. I know everybody says that about their pets. I don't mean that. I mean a working dog, a dog you've trained 4 nights a week for 2 years before it ever runs a real search, is a dog whose whole job is to use a sense. You don't have to find things, but you die without it. You get close to that dog in a way that's hard to put right. You put your life in its nose. That's the deal. On a real search, in real dark, your dog knows things you cannot know, and the whole discipline of being a handler is learning to trust the animal over your own eyes and your own ears and your own good, confident brain that's always wrong out there. Greta taught me that. It took me 2 seasons to stop second-guessing her and just read her and go where she said. The day I finally did it all the way, we found a little girl in a culvert nobody would have checked, and I never doubted a dog again. Greta died of a tumor when she was 11, and I won't spend long on it because it's the ordinary kind of grief that everybody who's loved an animal already knows the shape of, but I'll say this. The vet, a good young woman with kind hands, told me at the end that dogs don't fear death the way we do, that they just feel bad, and then they don't. And I've thought about that a lot in connection with everything else, about how a dog lives in its senses, in what's true right now in front of its nose, with none of the stories we lay over the top of the world. A dog can't be talked into anything. That's the whole thing about them, in the end. You can lie to a person all day long. You can lie to them with a voice, with a face, with a story that fits what they already want to be true. You cannot lie to a dog's nose. It knows what's actually there. It is the least foolable thing I have ever met, and I have come to believe that this is not a small fact about dogs, but maybe the most important one, and that Emmett understood it decades before I did. I got Boone as an 8-week-old pup the spring after Greta went, from a breeder up north who does working lines, and I picked him out of the litter the way you're supposed to, with tests, with a rag on a string and a crinkled water bottle, and all the little games that tell you which pup's got the drive and the nerve. And honestly, I picked him because when I set the whole litter loose in a strange room, 7 puppies, 6 of them went to explore, or to me, or to the noise, and one of them, the sable with the one soft ear, went straight to the one dark corner of the room, the one place nothing was happening, and stood there with his nose working, reading something the rest of them hadn't noticed. The breeder said, "That one's odd, he does that." I said I'd take the odd one. I have never in my life made a better decision. He read corners his whole life. He read the corner of that beaver flat when every human being present, including me, was looking at the bright, obvious middle of it where the voice was, and he was the only one of us with his nose in the dark corner where the truth was. Which is why the beaver flat broke something in me. Because Boone was telling me 2 things at once that couldn't both be true, and I'd built my whole self on the idea that the dog is never wrong. He'd found the boot. He'd hit something real. And then, with the live child crying for help, out in the water in front of us, he was sitting on my feet telling me the water was a hazard that kills and I was not to go into it. Every instinct I had as a person, as a mother, I've got 2 grown boys of my own, every instinct screamed to go toward the crying child. And my dog, the thing I had sworn 19 years to trust over my own instincts, was throwing his body in my way to stop me. You want to know what that does to a person standing in the mud, in the dark? It's not fear, not at first. It's vertigo. It's the floor of the world tipping. Because if the dog's wrong, everything's wrong, and if the dog's right, then the thing crying for help out in the water is not a little boy, and I did not have room in my head that night for what else it could be. The flat needs describing, 'cause we spend the night on it. The locals call it the Soaks. It's on the survey as Soak Creek Marsh, but nobody's called it that in 100 years. It's a big drowned bottom, couple 100 acres, where Soake Creek runs flat and slow through a stand of timber that the beaver have been damming and flooding and reflooding since before there was a county to notice. Half the trees out there are dead, standing gray snags with their feet in the water, and the other half are alive and leaning, and between them it's black water, a foot to 6 feet deep, floating bog mats that'll hold a heron and drop a man, channels you can't see till you're in them, and a bottom of soft silt that does not like to give back what it takes. In the daytime it's beautiful, in a spooky way, all mist and bird call and green light. At night it's the worst country in the county to look for somebody in, and that's saying something. Because we've got the sardine drainage too, and everybody who's worked here knows what the sardine is. Every SAR unit has its bad ground. What I learned, working here 2 decades, is that ours has more than one, and they're not all bad the same way. The sardine is bad in the high country, a dry, cold, sound-carrying kind of bad, a bowl that throws voices. The Soaks is bad down low, wet and close and patient, and if the sardine throws voices, then the Soak swallows them, or that's how the old hands always put it. And I used to think it was just a way of describing the acoustics, the way sound dies flat out there over the water with nothing to bounce off. I used to think a lot of things were just ways of describing the acoustics. The old-timers had a name for the soaks, before it was the soaks even, and I only heard it once, from a woman named Verna Tull, who's dead now too, who'd trapped that bottom as a girl in the 1940s with her father, and who I sat with one afternoon at the care home in town because Maribeth asked me to, because Verna had known the country better than anybody living. Verna called it the Quiet, with a capital on it, the way she said it. And she told me her father would not run his line out there after a hard freeze, because that was when the quiet was hungriest. Her word. And she told me, 91 years old, sharp as a tack, holding my hand the whole time, that when she was a girl she'd twice heard her own mother's voice call her out onto the ice from a spot where her mother was not. Once when her mother was home 3 miles away, and once when her mother had been in the ground 2 years. She said her father taught her the rule the trappers used, which was the same rule in the end that everybody in this county keeps relearning the hard way, dressed up different. On the quiet, you don't go to a voice. You go to the dog, or you go to nothing. The dogs always knew, she said. Her father ran a little feist bitch that would plant her feet and scream bloody murder at empty water, and he'd learn to turn the sled around whenever she did. And it kept him alive 50 years on the worst bottom in the state. I drove home from that visit and sat in my driveway a long time before I could go in. Verna died that winter. I'm glad I got the name from her before she went. The Quiet, it fits it better than the Soaks does. It fits it exactly. Emmett Cross, he trained the trackers. He's gone now. Good man, hard as a boot. Emmett told me once when I was new that the two places were the same thing, wearing different clothes. I didn't know what he meant. And I said, so, and he just looked at me with those flat little eyes and said, you've got the one animal out here that can smell the difference. Mind it. It's smarter than the rest of us put together. I thought he was paying Greta a compliment. Emmett didn't pay compliments. He was telling me something, and I was too green to hear it, and it took me until the night of the Vandermeer search, years after Emmett was in the ground, to finally hear it right. Mind the dog, it can smell the difference. The difference between what and what, he didn't say. He didn't have to in the end. Boone said it for him, sitting on my feet in the mud, with his hackles up, refusing to let me walk toward a crying child. We'd stepped off from the grandfather's place at about 7, an hour before dark, 6 teams fanning out around the flat. I had the north sector with a flanker, a good steady guy named Petey Alvarez, who'd walked behind my dogs for years and knew to keep his mouth shut and his light where I needed it. The plan was simple and grim. Work the edges fast while there was light, because a 9-year-old doesn't go far into water like that on purpose. And if he'd gone in, the edges were where we'd find him, one way or the other. Nobody said the other. You never do. But everybody carried it. Boone worked beautiful the first hour. He quartered the wind, tail up, happy, the way a good dog is happy doing the thing it was made for. He cleared a long stretch of the north shore, told me plain there was nobody in a couple 100 yards of tangled willow, and I flagged it clear, and we moved on, and the light went from gold to gray to nearly gone, and Petey lit his lamp, and somewhere in that first hour, the flat started doing the small wrong things it does, and I want to lay them out in order, because it's never one big thing. It's a slow stacking of little ones, and by the time you notice, you're already standing in the middle of it. The frogs went first. Early on, there'd been a wall of them, that spring peeper racket that a wet bottom throws in the evening, thousands of them, so loud you almost have to raise your voice. And at some point I noticed it had stopped, not faded stopped, the way a room goes quiet when the compressor on a cooler kicks off, and you only then realize it had been running. All those frogs, all at once, done. Petey noticed it too. He said, "Frogs quit," and I said, "Yeah," and we both let it go. Because frogs quit for all kinds of reasons. A heron working through, a change in the air, and it doesn't mean anything, except that out there it always seems to mean the same thing, which is that something has come into the neighborhood that the small living things would rather not be allowed around. Then there was the smell. Boone caught it before I did. I saw it in him. A little hitch, a swing of his head off the search pattern toward the open water, a thing he shook off and went back to work, but that I filed. And a minute later it came to me too, riding the cool air off the flat, and it wasn't a swamp smell. A swamp's got a smell, and I know it, that rich, rotten green sulfur thing, and this wasn't that. This was colder and emptier. It was like the inside of an old chest freezer that's been unplugged and shut for a year, that flat, stale, waiting cold metal smell, with something underneath it. I didn't want to think about too hard. It came and it went. Petey didn't mention it, so maybe he didn't get it. I didn't mention it either. There are things you don't say out loud on a flat at dusk because saying them makes them real and gives them your voice. And some animal part of me already knew that before I knew anything. The third thing was the water. We came around a slough where the channel opened up into a pond maybe 40 yards across. Dead flat, dead still, and I stopped to take a bearing off it. And I stood there long enough to notice that the far side of that pond had a little breeze on it. I could see the surface pricking and shivering over there. That fine texture wind puts on water in the near side. The 20 feet right in front of me was glass. Not a ripple, the same body of water, one wind, and half of it moving and half of it holding perfectly still, like something under the near side was keeping it that way. I looked at it too long. I've learned since not to look at things too long out there, that there's a kind of looking that's a door, but I didn't know that yet, and I stood and looked at the still black half of that pond until Boone came back and leaned on my leg and pushed me off it gently, the way he'd push me off a thing, and we went on. 3 small wrong things, stacked over an hour in the failing light. Any one of them, nothing. A person could explain every one. And then we came around a point of higher ground where an old beaver dam made a kind of causeway out into the timber, and that's where Boone found the boot, upright, laces tied, toe to the water. And that's where, 40 minutes into full dark, the crying started. I have to be careful describing it the way Cal Bishop's careful describing the voice in the bowl. I've heard him tell it at the debriefs in the years since. The two of us, the only ones in the room who really know, because the whole horror of the thing is in how right it sounds. It was a child crying, not screaming, crying, the exhausted hitching kind. The kind a kid does when he's been at it for hours and there's nothing left but the machine of it going on and on. It came from out in the timber, maybe 80, 100 yards low over the water. And in between the crying it said words, and the words were, I'm stuck, I can't get out, please. My feet are stuck. Petey went rigid beside me and his light swung out over the water. He said, oh Christ, there he is, Ren, he's in the water. He's stuck in the mud. And he took a step off the causeway, and I grabbed the back of his jacket, because Boone had already done to me what I was doing to Petey. Boone was on my feet, hackles from his neck to his tail. A low sound in his chest I'd heard maybe twice, a sound that is not a growl at a person or a bear, a sound with something underneath it I didn't have a name for. And he would not face the water. That was the thing. My dog, who faced everything, who'd faced a black bear at 40 feet without breaking his downstay, would not put his face toward the crying. He kept his body between me and it, and his head turned half away, like a man refusing to look at a wreck. Ren, we gotta go. He's right there. Petey. Stop. My own voice sounded strange to me. Look at the dog. I don't care about the... Look at the dog. And Petey looked at Boone, and I watched it work on him the way it works on people who know dogs, which Petey did. He'd walked behind Boone for years. He knew that dog didn't spook and didn't lie and didn't quit on a find. And here was that dog planted in the mud with his hair up and his face turned away from a crying child, physically blocking his handler from the water, and Petey's whole body sagged as some cold thing came into him. Why won't he go to it? Petey said. Quiet now. Ren. Why won't the dog go get him? I'll be honest about what I knew and when I knew it, because it'd be easy to make myself out smarter than I was. I did not know, standing there, what was out in the water. I want to be clear. I'm not one of these people with a tidy theory. I had heard the stories. Everybody on the team's heard the stories. The sardine, Danny Voss, who went into the bowl in 2019 and never came out. The old homestead diaries. The tribe's word for the high drainage that a man at the cultural center would only translate as the place that wears voices. I'd heard all of it, and I'd filed it the way you file things you can't use. Off to the side, not quite believe, not quite not. I'm a hygienist. I scale plaque off molars 40 hours a week. I am not a woman who goes looking for the supernatural, but I'm a handler, and the one thing a handler knows all the way down, past belief, past theory, past what sounds crazy at the Elks on a Tuesday, is that the dog knows more than you do. That's not faith. That's the documented arrangement. His nose is 10,000 times the instrument mine is. He lives in a world of information I can only guess at from the outside, reading his body like a needle on a gauge. And every gauge I had was pegged. The dog had found something real. The boot, a scent, something, and the dog was telling me, with everything he had, that the crying was not the thing he'd found. That the crying and the real child were two different things, and one of them was a hazard that kills, and it was not the boot. So I made the call that I've had to live with, good and bad, ever since. I keyed my radio and I said, "Base Kessler. I have a voice in the water. North Timber. Sounds like the subject. Calling for help." And then I said the sentence that changed the night, that I still don't fully know how I had the nerve to say with a child crying in my ears. I said, "My dog will not work it." Repeat, "Canine will not work the voice. He's giving me a hazard alert on it. I do not believe the voice is the subject." There was a silence on the radio, a long one. And then Mara Beth Reyes came back, and I have loved that woman a long time, but never more than right then, because she didn't argue, and she didn't tell me a scared dog isn't evidence, and she didn't send me into the water after a crying child on the word of my own 2 ears. What she said was, "Copy, Kessler. Trust your dog. Hold your position. Nobody works that voice. All teams, hold and acknowledge. Nobody moves toward the North Timber." And one by one, out around that black flat, the teams keyed up and answered. Team 2, hold. Team 4, hold. Team 6, holding. And every one of those acknowledgments was a person out in the dark deciding, against everything decent in them, not to go toward a child crying for help in the water. That's a hard thing to ask people to do. That's maybe the hardest thing this work has ever asked of anybody. And they did it because a dog said no, and because Maribeth said trust the dog, and because some of them had worked the sardine and knew what it was to hear a voice you must not answer. Not all of them held easy, though, and this part belongs in it, because it's the part that shows what we were really standing against out there, what it does when it's told no. There was a newer pair on Team 4, over on the east side of the flat, a good kid named Brandon, maybe a year in, and his flanker. And a few minutes after the hold order, Brandon keyed up, and his voice was wrong, high and tight, and he said, "Base Team 4, I've got the subject in sight." Or, "I've got a voice real close. He's right here in the cattails. He's right in front of me. I can hear him. I'm going in for him." And you could hear it in him, the thing that was happening. The crying had moved. That's the part nobody outside this understands. It isn't stuck in one place. It had left the North Timber where it had me pinned, and it was over on the east side now, in Brandon's cattails, right in front of him, doing to him exactly what it had done to me, except Brandon didn't have a dog. Brandon had 2 ears and a good heart and a year of training, and that is not enough. That is nowhere near enough against the thing in the water. And Maribeth's voice came over the radio flat and hard as a slap. "Team 4, negative. Do not go in." Brandon, look at me on the radio, son. That is not the subject." Kessler's K9 has a hazard alert on that voice across the whole flat. It is not the boy. You will hold. Acknowledge. Nothing. Just the open channel hissing. Team 4 flanker, Maribeth said, put a hand on your partner. Physically, right now. And then Brandon's flanker, an older guy, came on breathing hard, and he said, I got him. I got a hold of him. He was Christ. Maribeth, he was 3 steps into the water. I got him by the pack. And you could hear Brandon in the background then, and he was crying himself now, arguing, saying, it's him, he's right there. How can you not hear him? He's calling for his mom. And I stood on my causeway a quarter mile away with my own crying child pouring into my ears from the north timber, and I understood that it was working all of us at once. It had a voice for every team on that flat. It wasn't one child crying in one place. It was a child crying in front of every single one of us. Personal, close, aimed, all at the same time. And the only reason the whole unit didn't walk into the soaks that night and drown chasing it is that one dog on one causeway had said no loud enough and early enough that a woman at a radio believed him and gave the order before it. Could take the first of us. That's how close it was, and it's the plain truth of it. It came within one older man's grip on one pack strap of taking Brandon from Team 4, and if it had gotten Brandon, if there had been a splash and a scream and a man going under out there, I don't know that the hold holds. I don't know that people stand on the bank and listen to one of their own drown and don't go in. I think that might be the whole game, actually. I think it wasn't trying to get the boy. I think the boy was bait. It had already used up, and what it was fishing for out there in the dark was us, a whole team of the exact kind of people who cannot listen to a child cry and do nothing. The softest-hearted people in the county, gathered in one bad place on one bad night, and it very nearly had a full net. Beside me, Petey had gone down to one knee in the mud with both hands over his ears, and he was rocking a little, and he said through his teeth, "Make it stop, Ren. Make it stop. I can't, it's so real. Why is it so real?" And I got down with him, and I took his wrists, and I pulled his hands off his ears, which sounds backward, but I needed him hearing me over it. And I put my forehead against the side of his head, the way I'd seen Cal Bishop describe doing with his people up on the Sardine. And I said, "Petey, the dog. Put your hand on the dog." And I took his hand and I pressed it into Boone's fur, into that big, warm, shaking body that would not face the water, and I said, "He's the truth. He's the only true thing out here right now. Anything the dog won't go to, we don't go to. Hold on to the dog." And Petey grabbed 2 fistfuls of Boone's coat, and he held on like a man in a current holds a root, and Boone let him. Boone stood there and let a grown man cling to him and take the truth off him through his fingers, and that was the job too. That was Boone doing the job, being the one solid true thing on a flat full of lies. And here's the part I don't tell many people, because it's the part where I almost went. It changed for me. At the end of the siege, the crying stopped being just crying. It found something. I don't know how, maybe the same way it found Tyler's dead mother up on the Sardine. Maybe it just reaches into you and takes what's there, but the child's voice out in the North Timber, without ever stopping being Cody Vandermeer's voice, started saying a thing that wasn't Cody's to say. It started saying, "Mom, Mom, I'm scared. Mommy, please." And I have 2 boys. They're grown now, big men with jobs and trucks. But there was a stretch of years when they were small, and one of them, my younger one, had night terrors. And he would call out in the dark, exactly like that. Exactly. "Mommy, please, I'm scared." And I would go to him every single time. I would go through fire to that sound. It is burned into the animal core of me, deeper than anything, deeper than sense, deeper than the dog and the thing in the water found, that it found the one sound I cannot not answer, and it started making it out over the black water in a child's voice, calling for its mother. I got up. I don't even remember deciding to. I was just up, and my foot was on the wet edge of the causeway where the mud goes to water, one foot already sinking, going to my boy, going to the sound, and there was no thought in it at all. There was just 25 years of A mother's whole body turned toward a child crying for her in the dark. Boone hit me, not sat on my feet. Hit me, threw the whole 75 pounds of himself sideways into my knees and buckled me, dropped me back onto the solid ground on my hip in the mud, and then he was on top of me, standing over me, his face an inch from mine. And he did the thing I'd never seen him do and never saw again. He showed me his teeth, my own dog. He curled his lip and showed me every tooth in his head and made that sound with the something underneath it, not at the water, at me, telling me in the only language strong enough to reach through what had hold of me, no, no, you do not go. And it was so shocking, so completely against everything he was, my gentle Boone showing me his teeth, that it broke the spell. It cut through the mother thing and dropped me back into my own body, gasping, on the ground, with my dog standing over me, shaking and lipped up and terrified of what he'd had to do to keep me. And out in the water the voice went on calling, "Mommy, please." And it hadn't gotten me, because the least foolable thing I ever met loved me enough to bare its teeth in my face. The crying went on. It got worse when we didn't come. That's the part I dream about. When we held, when nobody came splashing out to save it, the crying changed. It got more desperate, more specific. It started using the details, the way the thing in the bowl uses details. "Please, my grandpa's gonna be so mad. Please just come get me. I'll be good." 9 years old. Every word of it, a 9-year-old boy. And I stood on the causeway with my hand in Boone's ruff, feeling him shake, feeling myself shake, and I did not go, because the dog said don't, and the dog had never once been wrong. Here's the thing I've thought about most in the years since, the thing that finally made sense of what Emmett told me. The reason the voice was crying is that the real one couldn't. I didn't understand it yet out on the causeway. I understood it about 40 minutes later, and I understood it in the worst possible way, which is by finding out. Because after we held after the whole flat went still and nobody came for the crying, and the crying finally slowly started to run down like a music box winding out, Boone changed. The hazard alert came off him, the hackles went down, and he lifted his nose and worked the wind, and he turned away from the water, away from the crying, toward the higher ground behind us, the way we'd come, and he gave me the real thing, the happy thing, the look what I found. He'd had it the whole time, I think. He'd hit the real scent cone way back, and he'd been trying to give it to me, and I'd been so turned around by the boot and then the voice that I hadn't read him right. He'd been telling me two things, and I'd heard them as a contradiction, and they were never a contradiction. He was saying, "Not that way is the hazard, and this way, the person's this way." I let him take me. God help me, it went against everything, walking away from a child still crying in the water behind us, but I'd already bet the night on the dog, and there was no betting half. I let Boone lead, and Petey came behind with the light, and we went back off the causeway and up onto the higher ground and along a game trail through the willow, away from the flat, away from the voice. And the crying behind us got fainter, and about 200 yards on, in a little dry hollow under a leaning cedar, well back from any water, Boone ran up to a small gray shape curled in the leaves, and he lay down beside it, which is his trained alert for a person who isn't moving. He lay down next to it, and he looked back at me, and he thumped his tail once. It was Cody Vandermeer. He was alive. Barely. He was so cold he'd gone past shivering, which is the bad sign, the sign you're running out of time, and he was curled up small under that cedar where he'd crawled to get away from the water hours before. And here's the thing that put the cold all the way into the center of me and has never fully left. He wasn't making a sound. He couldn't. He was too far gone to cry. He was too cold and too spent to do anything but breathe. Little shallow breaths, his eyes half open and not tracking. A 9-year-old boy who had cried himself out hours ago somewhere back in the dark and had nothing left. The real Cody, the actual lost child, was silent as a stone under that tree. He had not made a sound in a long time, and would not have made another one that anybody could have followed. And out in the water, 150 yards back, something had been crying in his exact voice, loud, clear, carrying, calling us in. I've thought a lot about the arithmetic of that, because the arithmetic is the horror, not the ghost. A lost child is the easiest thing in the world to save if you can hear him, and the hardest thing in the world to save if you can't. Everything about a search comes down to signal, a whistle, a shout, a light, a track, a scent, some thread the lost person throws off that a searcher can follow back to the source. Take away the signal, and a person 40 feet off a trail can lie down and die and never be found, which has happened in this county to people who were closer to rescue than they'd ever have believed. So the cruelest possible thing you could do to a lost child, if you were something that fed on this, would not be to hurt him. It would be to take his signal, to reach out on that first evening while he was still crying and lift the crying right off him, his one thread, his one hope of being followed home, and then to carry that stolen thread a quarter-mile away and wave it over deep water to pull his rescuers in the wrong direction. You don't have to lay a hand on the boy. You just take his voice and you leave him in the silence, and the silence does the killing, and you use the voice to try to drown the people who came for him. 1 theft, 2 kills, if it goes right. It nearly went right. That's when I understood Emmett. That's when it all came together, and I had to kneel down in the leaves and be sick, quietly, off to the side, before I could do my job. The thing in the flat had taken the boy's voice from earlier, when he still had one, when he was still out there crying, where it could hear him, and it had kept the crying and thrown it out over the water to bring us in. And the boy himself, the real boy, the one it had taken the voice from, was lying silent and freezing 200 yards the other direction, exactly where the voice was not. If we'd gone to the crying, the way every human instinct screamed to, we'd have gone deep into that black water away from him, and we'd have spent the whole night and probably a man or two out there chasing a sound, and Cody Vandermeer would have died silent under his cedar 300 feet from a road, while 40 people searched the wrong end of a swamp for his own stolen voice. The only thing on that whole flat that could tell the stolen voice from the silent boy was a dog's nose, not our ears. Our ears were the thing it beat. Not our eyes, not our hearts, not our training. All of that pulled us toward the water, toward the crying, toward the trap. Only the nose knew. Only the animal that read the truth in a language the thing couldn't fake, because whatever it is out there, it can wear a voice, but it cannot wear a scent, or it hadn't learned to yet. And I pray to a God I'm not sure of that. It never does. Because the day it learns to fool the dogs is the day this work becomes something none of us can survive. We got Cody out. I did the things you do. I got my own coat and Petey's coat around him, and I got him up against my body for the heat, and I talked to him low, even though he couldn't answer. Told him he was found. Told him his grandpa was waiting. Told him he did so good, hanging on like that. Petey called it in, and Maribeth had the litter team and the medic to us inside of 20 minutes, coming up the game trail from the road with their lights bouncing. And they wrapped him and warmed him and ran an IV and carried him out, and he lived. He spent a week in the hospital in town, and he lost the tips of 2 toes to the cold, and he lived. He's 14 now. He doesn't remember much of that night, which is a mercy. And what he does remember, he's got wrong in the ordinary way. Memory gets things wrong, and nobody's ever going to correct him. He remembers a dog. He told his grandpa after that a dog laid down next to him in the dark and kept him company until the people came. That part he's got right. The medic that night was a young guy named Kesson, no relation to me despite the near miss on the name. Sharp kid, EMT, working toward paramedic. And while he worked on Cody, he kept glancing at Boone and at me, and finally, low, so the others wouldn't hear. He asked me how the dog had found the boy so far from the water when everybody on the radio had been talking about a voice down in the timber. It was an innocent question. He was new. He didn't know yet what the veterans knew, not to ask on that flat. And I looked at that good young man kneeling in the leaves with his hands keeping a child alive, and I thought about all the ways to answer. And what I finally said was, the dog doesn't listen to voices. The dog goes by smell. Which is true, and which he took as an answer, and which is the whole thing, really. The entire hard-won lesson of my life, folded up small enough to hand to a stranger who wasn't ready for the rest of it. The dog goes by smell. The dog can't be lied to. Thank God for the one creature out here that can't be lied to. While the litter team worked, Boone stayed pressed against Cody's other side, adding his heat, doing the last part of the job, and I knelt there in the leaves with my hand on my dog, and I could not stop the tears, and I didn't try. Not for the boy. The boy was going to make it. For the dog. Because I understood, kneeling there, exactly what my dog was, and what he'd done, and what it had cost him to do it, because Boone was still shaking hours later, the way I've only seen a dog shake after a thing that frightened it past its bottom, and Boone did not frighten. He'd stood between me and the worst thing in that country, and he'd done it not because he was brave, though he was, but because he loved me. Because the whole architecture of a working dog is that it puts itself between you and the thing that kills. And he'd smelled what was in the water, and he'd decided, in whatever a dog has for a soul, that it would sit on my feet in the mud and take that fear into its own body before it would let me walk into it. Behind us, back over the flat, the crying had stopped. I don't know when. Somewhere in the getting Cody out of it, the thing in the water had gone quiet, the way it does when it doesn't get what it came for. It didn't call again that night. It didn't try Petey's name or mine, the way the bowl tries names. Maybe it doesn't work that way, down in the wet. Maybe the soaks and the sardine really are the same thing in different clothes, and they just have different manners. All I know is it went quiet, and we walked out under a sky full of hard, cold stars. Me and Petey and a half-frozen boy on a litter and a shaking dog who wouldn't leave my leg, and none of us said a word the whole way to the road. I never did settle the thing about the boot, and it's the boot that comes back to me at odd hours, more than almost anything else, more than the crying even, because the boot was placed. I've turned it over 1,000 times and there's no version where it wasn't. Cody Vandermeer crawled out of that water hours before we ever got there, and dragged himself up onto high ground 200 yards away, and curled up under a cedar, and lost his voice, and nearly died. The medics were clear on the timeline. He'd been out of the water a long while, so his boot did not come off in the water that evening and float up neat and dry onto a hummock at the exact edge of the causeway, laces tied, toe pointed out at the timber like an arrow, at the exact spot where the crying would start 20 minutes later. Somebody set it there. Something set it there. It took the boy's boot from wherever it came off him, and it carried it to the edge of the trap, and it stood it up, pretty as you please, to draw a searcher's eye and a searcher's dog to that one spot on a 200-acre flat, and then it waited in the water for us to arrive, and when we did, it started to cry. That's the thing I can't get past. Not the voice. The staging. The voice you could almost tell yourself was some trick of a lonely place, some echo, some swamp gas of the soul. But the boot was an object in the world, moved by intention, set as bait by a thing that understood what a boot at the water's edge would do to people like us. It planned. It laid a trap with a prop in it, and then it worked the trap with a stolen voice. And a thing that plans is a thing that thinks, and a thing that thinks is a thing that learns. And I have spent years now not letting myself follow that thought all the way to the end, because the end of it is that it's out there getting better at us, one search at a time. I talked it through exactly once, a few weeks after, at a thing that wasn't an official debrief. Maribeth had me and Cal Bishop out to her place for a supper that we all three understood wasn't really a supper. Cal's the tracker from the sardine, the one who lost a man in the bowl and never lost another. He'd heard about the soaks. And the three of us sat at Maribeth's kitchen table a long time not saying much, and then Cal asked me to tell it, and I told it, all of it, the boot and the crying, and Boone showing me his teeth. And when I got done, Cal was quiet for a while, and then he said, "Ours doesn't set things out." Ours just calls. And Maribeth said, maybe they're different. And Cal shook his head slow and said the thing that's kept me up more nights than the crying ever did. He said, or maybe it's the same one, and it does whatever the ground lets it. Up high dry, all it's got is the voice. Down in the wet, with all that stuff floating around to work with, it's got hands. Nobody said anything after that for a long time. Then Maribeth got up and cleared the plates, which is what she does when a thing has been said that can't be answered, and that was the debrief, and none of us has ever brought it up again. Boone worked 3 more years. He was never quite the same after the soaks, and neither was I, but a good working dog doesn't quit, and neither does a good handler. And we had finds in those 3 years. I am proud of an old woman with dementia, in a blackberry thicket, a hunter with a compound fracture, a suicidal kid off his meds that we got to in time, which is the one I'm gladdest of in my whole career. Boone did all of it with that one ear up asking its question, and that big chest, and that way he had of looking back at me on a find, like, see, I told you I'd find them. He got gray in the muzzle. He got slow on the hills, and I started picking easier sectors for us, and then I started leaving him in the truck for the rough ones, which he hated, which he'd give me a look about that could break your heart. And then one spring his back end started going the way it does with shepherds, that slow betrayal of the hips, and I retired him, and he spent a year and a half being just a dog, just my dog, sleeping in the sun and stealing the other dog's food and being loved, which he'd more than earned. And then his heart quit one night in his sleep on the rug by my bed, and I found him in the morning, and that was that. And I've got the young one now. She's a Malinois, 2 years old. All engine, name of Juniper, and she's going to be good. She's already good. She's got a nose on her that Maribeth says is the best she's seen come through the unit, and I love her the way you love the new one, which is real but different, still building, not yet made of years. And here's the thing I carry now, the thing that sits in me on every call out, the thing that is the actual end of this story, even though nothing's happening in it. No voice in the water, no crying, just a middle-aged woman and a young dog and a fear. Juniper's never worked the soaks or the sardine. She's never met the thing that wears voices. And I don't know, I can't know, until it happens, whether she'll do what Boone did, whether she'll smell the difference and sit on my feet and refuse the crying. Whether she's got that in her, whatever it was, that thing past training, the thing that made an animal stand between me and the water. Boone had it. Greta, I think, had it, though we never got tested that way in her years. But it's not something you can train, and it's not something you can test for, and it's not on any certification. And there is going to come a night, this country being what it is, this work being what it is, when I am out on bad ground in the dark with Juniper, and something is going to start crying for help in a voice I'll want with my whole body to believe. And I am going to have to look down at a 2-year-old dog I love but don't yet fully know, and read her and bet everything on what I see. And I don't know what she'll do. That's the fear. Not the thing in the water. The thing in the water I almost understand now. The fear is that the only creature that ever stood between me and it is asleep in the ground by my bed, and the one at my side now is untested, and someday the test is coming and it doesn't announce itself. It just starts crying out over the water, in the dark, in the voice of somebody's child. I still run searches on the soaks when they come, which isn't often, thank God. Most people don't get lost out there because most people have the good sense to stay off it. But the ones who do get lost out there, get lost bad, and somebody has to go, and I know that country, and my dog's the best in the unit, so we go. I don't work the crying anymore, if it comes. That's policy now. Unwritten, the way the sardine's a policy nobody wrote down. On the soaks, you work the dog and you work the dog only, and if you hear a voice in the water that your dog won't face, you hold, and you call it and you wait, and you let the animal take you the other way, toward the silence, because that's where the real ones are. The real ones are always in the silence, too cold or too hurt or too far gone to make a sound, while their stolen voices call sweet and loud from the deep water where the bottom doesn't give things back. Last month we had a call out that way. Not a bad one, as it turned out a mushroom picker who'd just gotten turned around and walked out on her own before we even deployed. But I was already suited up, already had Juniper vibrating with excitement at the tailgate, and while we waited for the stand down, I stood at the edge of the flat in the last of the light, and I looked out over the black water and the gray drowned snags, and I put my hand down on my young dog's head, and I listened. There wasn't any crying, just the flat going quiet the way it does at dusk, the birds shutting up one kind at a time, the water holding still, but Juniper went stiff under my hand, just for a second. She lifted her nose toward the timber, and she held dead still the way a dog does when it catches a thread of something on the wind, something far off, something it's deciding about, and the hair came up along her spine, just a little, just for a moment. And then Maribeth called the stand down over the radio, and Juniper shook it off and looked up at me all wags, ready to go home, whatever it was gone or forgotten or filed away in that place a dog keeps things. I've thought about that second every day since. I don't know what she smelled. I'll never know. Could have been an elk. Could have been nothing, a young dog being a young dog. Could have been the wind off the deep water carrying a thread of something that's been out there wearing voices since before the beaver, since before the homesteaders, since before anybody had a word for it, but stay off the flat after dark. I loaded her up and I drove her home, and I gave her Boone's old spot by the bed, which she'd earned by then, and I lay awake a long time listening to her breathe. This untested animal I've bet the rest of my nights on, and I thought about the thing Emmett said to me when I was young and green, and thought he was complimenting my dog. You've got the one animal out here that can smell the difference. Mind it. I mind it. God knows I mind it. But minding it only works as long as the animal can tell, and there's going to be a night I find out whether this one can, and I think about that night more than I think about almost anything. Out here at the wet edge of the county where the real ones die in silence and only the false ones call. Story 3. The Dead Channel. The repeater on Bald Knob had been down since a lightning strike in June, which is the whole reason I knew the voice couldn't be real. And it's the reason I sat there at 2 a.m. listening to a dead man read me numbers off a map that doesn't have them. The board is the story, so it's worth setting out first. I run comms for Calder County Search and Rescue, have for 22 years. My name's Wes Dunmore. I'm 63. I put in 30 years climbing poles for the electric co-op before my back retired me, and I've been a licensed ham since I was 14 years old. Call sign the same all that time, and if there's one thing on this earth I understand down to the copper, it's how a radio signal gets from a mouth to an ear. That's not bragging. It just has to land right, because I am the last man in this county who'd mistake a skip signal or a stuck mic or an atmospheric bounce for something it wasn't. I've spent my life inside the physics of it. I know what a radio can and can't do, the way Cal Bishop knows ground and the way Wren Kessler knows her dog. And what I heard that night, a radio cannot do. On a search, I'm the guy in the box. The command trailer, the comms van, sometimes just my truck with the good antenna and the county repeater list taped to the dash. Teams go out into the dark with handhelds, and I'm the voice in their ear, and they're the voices in mine, and my whole job is to keep every one of them accounted for on a board in front of me, call signs, assignments, last known positions, times of last contact, and to be the calm in the channel when it gets bad, because it does get bad, and a scared searcher 4 miles out in the black needs the bass voice to be flat and sure, or the whole thing comes apart. I'm good at it. I'll say that plain. There are flashier jobs on a search. The trackers, the dog handlers, the rope teams, and I've got no envy in me for any of them, because I've come to understand over 22 years that the search runs on comms, the way a body runs on nerves, and a team that can't talk is a team that's already lost. They just don't know it yet. So, that's me. 63 bad back, good ears, a wall of radios, and a religious respect for what the airwaves will and won't carry. That last part is the thing that matters, so it's worth sitting on a minute. Of all the people it could have reached through that night, it reached the one man who knew, to the bottom of his bones, that the channel it used was dead. I should say a word about why a man loves radio. because it bears on how hard the night hit me. I came up on it as a lonely kid in a house that wasn't much fun to be in, and the ham set my uncle gave me was a door out of that house to the whole turning world. I'd sit up past midnight with a wire antenna strung out the window and pull in voices from Japan, from a ship in the South Atlantic, from a man in Nebraska who couldn't sleep either, and it was magic. But here's the thing, it was magic with rules. Everything the radio did, it did for a reason. Signal follows law. It bounces off the ionosphere at night and dies in the daytime. It fades on a schedule you can predict. It drops behind a mountain and comes back when you climb. And every strange thing it ever did in 50 years, I could run down to a cause if I sat with it long enough. That's what I loved, not the mystery. The opposite of mystery. A whole invisible world that always, always obeyed. In a life that had plenty in it that didn't make sense, I buried a boy of my own, a crib death 40 years back. And Nadine and I have a way of not talking about it that's held us together in a life like anybody's, full of things with no reason to them. The radio was the one place where everything had a reason, and the reasons were knowable. I built my whole self on that. 50 years, I never once met a signal I couldn't explain. And then I met one at 2 a.m. at the Cutbank trailhead, and it broke something in me that I don't think is healed and I don't think will, because it wasn't a fear exactly. It was the floor going out. It was the one place in my life that always obeyed the rules, doing a thing that has no cause I will ever find. And if the radio can lie, if the one honest thing can lie, then I don't know what's underneath any of it anymore. Cal Bishop lost his faith in the woods on the lip of that bowl. Ren Kessler nearly lost hers in her own 2 years out on the quiet. I lost mine in the airwaves, in the one invisible world I had trusted my whole life to follow the law, and I want that understood going in, because it's the real wound, deeper than the scare. The subject was a young man named Marcus Deal, 27, from out of the valley, experienced backpacker by the look of his gear list. Went in solo on a Thursday for a 3-night loop up in the high country north of the Sardine drainage. Told his girlfriend he'd be out Sunday, and didn't come out Sunday, and didn't answer his phone, and by Sunday night she'd called it in, and by Monday pre-dawn we were spun up and staging at the Cutbank trailhead with the sky just going gray and coffee steaming in the cold. Good conditions, as these things go. Dry week, mild nights, a fit young man who knew what he was doing, the kind of subject who's usually just late, usually just turned an ankle and is limping out, usually a happy ending. Maribeth Reyes ran it the way she runs all of them, and she set the initial assignments around the loop trail and the drainages that feed it. And I set up in the trailer at Cutbank with my board and my radios and got everybody checked onto Channel 1, and we started the way we always start, methodical, hopeful, professional. The radio picture that first day matters, because the first day was clean, nothing wrong with it. I had 6 field teams, a couple of them with dogs, and the ball knob repeater being down was an annoyance, but nothing more. It meant some of the far sectors were simplex only, radio to radio direct instead of relayed off the mountaintop, so I had a couple of dead spots where I'd lose a team behind a ridge until they climbed out of it, and I managed those the way you manage them, with scheduled check-ins and relay teams and a grease pencil. Ordinary. I'd worked around that dead repeater on 3 searches since June. Everybody had. The county had the part on order. A repeater's just a radio on a mountain that listens on one frequency and rebroadcasts on another, so signals clear the terrain, and ours had taken a direct hit in a summer storm and cooked its guts, and it sat up there on bald knob, dark and dead as a stone, transmitting exactly nothing, which is a fact I could have sworn to in court, which I would have bet my life on, which I did, in a way, bet other men's lives on before the night was through. His girlfriend came up to staging Monday, which they mostly don't and mostly shouldn't, but she drove up anyway, and Maribeth let her stay in the warming tent because sometimes it's crueler to send them home to stare at a phone. Her name was Priya, and she was maybe 25, and she held it together the way the strong ones do, which is worse to watch than the ones who fall apart, and she had the last voicemail Marcus had left her from Wednesday night, the night before he went in, and at some point that first day she played it for Maribeth and me, I think because she needed somebody official to have heard his voice, needed him to be real to us and not just a name on the board. It was nothing, the voicemail. It was a young man saying, "Hey, made it to the trailhead. Phone's about to lose signal. Love you. See you Sunday. Don't forget to feed the cat." He laughed at his own cat joke. That was the whole thing. But I heard it, and Maribeth heard it, and half the team heard it over the next day because Priya couldn't stop playing it, and that's how it came to be that when a voice said, "Bass, this is Marcus Steele," at 2 in the morning, there were a dozen of us who knew exactly what Marcus Steele sounded like, knew the pitch and the rhythm and the little laugh of him, and knew that the thing on my radio had him down cold. It had listened to that boy. Somewhere, sometime, it had listened to Marcus Steele long enough to learn him to the bone, and the only window it had was the day he walked in and the hours he lay dying, and I try not to think about which. Monday we found his camp. That was the first thing that wasn't right, though it read as good news at the time. A dog team hit his tent, still pitched, up a side drainage off the main loop, and his gear was in it, sleeping bag, stove, most of his food, and his boots were gone and his day pack was gone, which told us he'd gone out from camp on a day hike and not come back, the classic bad setup. A strong hiker who leaves the heavy stuff and walks off light to bag a peak or find a view and gets hurt or gets turned around miles from his safety net. It narrows things and it worsens things at the same time. We had a center now. We also had a man who'd been out 3-4 days on a day hike's worth of supplies, and the good conditions optimism started to leak out of everybody at staging, quiet the way it does. Maribeth pushed teams up the side drainage and toward the high stuff above it, and that's when the country started to matter, because the high stuff above Marcus Steele's camp, if you kept going, over the ridge and down the far side, was the head of the Sardine drainage. The Sardine Bowl was maybe 2 miles and one nasty ridgeline from where his tent stood. Nobody said much about that at staging, but I saw Maribeth's grease pencil pause on the map when she laid the assignments. Saw her set the boundary of the search area just shy of the ridge. Saw her keep the teams on the near side of it. And I understood, because I've been doing this as long as she has, that she was drawing a line she hoped Marcus Steele hadn't crossed. The radio started doing small wrong things Monday afternoon, and because I'm me, because I run everything down to a cause, I had a cause for every one of them, right up until I didn't. That's how it works. That's how it always works. It hides inside the ordinary explainable static of a thing until the ordinary explanations run out, and by then you're already a long way in. The first was a click. Middle of the afternoon, in the open hiss of Channel 1 between traffic. A click, a single hard key up and key down. The sound of somebody pressing a mic button and releasing it without speaking. We call it a kerchunk. Happens all the time. Somebody sits on a mic. A radio bumps in a pack. I logged it, out of habit, the time, and thought nothing. Except it came again 20 minutes later, and again 20 minutes after that, regular, on the 20, like a clock. And I found myself, without deciding to, watching the time on my board, and at the top of the third 20 I said out loud to the empty trailer, "There it is." A half second before the click came, and it came, right on the 20, and the hair moved on my neck for no reason I could have defended, because a mic bump is a mic bump, and it doesn't keep a schedule, and I told myself the atmosphere was doing something, and I wrote it down, and I let it go. The second thing was the scanner. I keep a scanner running alongside the working radios. Always have, sweeping the county frequencies, and the weather, and the sheriff's channels. Just background, just a habit from a lifetime of wanting to know what the airwaves are up to. And Monday evening the scanner started stopping on the bald knob output. That's the dead frequency the scanner sweeps across it every few seconds, and normally it blows right on past because there's nothing there. No carrier, no signal, nothing to make it stop. And it started stopping on it. Locking up on that dead channel for a second, 2 seconds, the little frequency display sitting there on the bald knob output like it had found a signal, and then moving on. There was nothing to hear when it stopped, just the open hiss. But a scanner doesn't stop on a frequency for no reason. It stops when it detects a carrier, when something is transmitting, and it was stopping on the output of a machine that could not transmit. And I told myself it was a spurious lockout, a bit of noise, a nearby electrical thing, and I turned the scanner's squelch up a hair so it'd quit doing it, and it quit, and I let it go. The third thing I didn't have any explanation for at all, and it's the one that put the first true cold in me, hours before the voice. Late Monday night, before I took my break, I was logging a routine check-in from Team 3, and while the team's flanker was talking an ordinary position report, nothing to it I heard, way down under his voice, under the signal, in the noise floor, where there shouldn't be anything but the random hiss of the universe. A second sound. Faint. Rhythmic. It rode along under the man's words the whole length of his transmission and stopped when he unkeyed. I have listened to the noise floor of radio signals for 50 years. It's the sea I swim in, and I know its sounds, and this wasn't one of them. It was too regular. It had a shape. If I had to say what it sounded like, I'd say it sounded like breathing slow, patient, in and out, somebody breathing quietly on the line under a searcher's voice. Way down in the part of the signal that carries no information, that's supposed to be nothing but the empty roar of the cosmos. I keyed up and asked Team 3's flanker, casual, if he had an open mic or somebody near him, and he said no, just the two of them, quiet as a church out there. I logged it. I did not write down what it sounded like. There are things you don't commit to the log in your own hand at midnight, and some old animal wisdom in me knew that already, the same wisdom that keeps a trapper's dog off the ice, and I let it go, and I went and got my 4 hours. And while I slept, the clicks kept their schedule on a channel nobody was keying. Out in the dark, counting down the 20s to 2 in the morning. The voice came in the second night, Monday night, going into Tuesday. 10 to 2 in the morning by the clock on my board. I'd been on comms about 19 hours with a 4-hour break in the middle, and I was in that scooped out state you get in the deep middle of a multi-day search, running on coffee and routine. Most of my teams pulled back to rest, with 2 night teams still working the high sectors. It was quiet. Channel 1 had that 3 in the morning hiss it gets, the sound of an open channel with nobody talking, which after 22 years is as familiar to me as my own breathing. I had Team 2 working a bench up near the ridge, and Team 5 down in the timber lower, and I was watching the board and keeping the coffee down and thinking about nothing. And the voice came onto Channel 1 and said, "Base, this is Marcus Steele. Does anybody copy? I need help. I want to be precise about what happened in my body, 'cause it's the truest record I've got." Before my mind did anything, before I thought about the name or the impossibility or any of it, my hand was already going for the mic, because that's 22 years of training. A voice says base, and you answer, and my hand knew its job before my head caught up. And then my head caught up about a half second later, and 3 things hit me at once and stopped my hand in the air. The first was the name. Subjects don't call base. Marcus Steele didn't have a county radio. He had a phone with no signal, and no way on God's earth to transmit on our channel. The second was the signal itself, and this is the part only I would have caught, the part I've never been able to make a civilian understand. That transmission was full quieting, and what that means is it came in perfect. 0 noise, 0 static, the squelch opening clean, and the voice sitting on top of the carrier like a studio, recording the kind of signal you only get from a strong transmitter through a good repeater, close in, line of sight. A man lost and hurt in a drainage, keying some improvised radio he couldn't have had in the first place from down in the terrain, would come in weak and broken and buried in noise if he came in at all. This came in like the man was sitting in my lap, Nothing out there in that country transmits full quieting into the Cutbank trailhead from the high drainages. Nothing except the bald knob repeater when it's working, which is exactly why the signal was impossible, because the third thing is that when I looked at my frequency display to see what was even happening, the voice was not coming in on channel 1's simplex. It was coming in on the repeater output frequency. It was coming through bald knob. It was being relayed off a machine that had been dead as a fence post since June, a machine I personally knew to be a box of burned circuit boards on a dark mountain. A machine that was transmitting exactly nothing because it could not transmit anything, and it was putting a clean, full quieting signal into my trailer in the voice of a man we hadn't found. I sat there with my hand in the air off the mic and every hair on my arm standing up, and the voice said again, patient, calm, a little tired, "Base, this is Marcus Steele. I've got my coordinates. Please, copy them down." The coordinates need explaining, because the coordinates are how it almost took 3 good people, and they're the cleverest and worst part of the whole thing. When it started reading numbers, my hand, that trained hand, grabbed the pencil before I decided anything, and I wrote them down, because a lost subject giving you a position is the single most valuable thing that can happen on a search. It's the whole ball game. It's what you pray for. And 22 years had my handwriting before my head could stop it. It read me a latitude and a longitude, degrees, minutes, and then decimals, and it read the decimals slow and careful and kind, like a man who knows his life depends on getting them right, like a man reading them off a GPS screen in his palm. And that's the first place it slipped, if you knew, to catch it, and God help me, it took me 2 full sets before I caught it. It read too many decimals. A handheld GPS gives you a position good to a few meters. You get so many decimal places and no more. That's the machine's precision. That's physics again, my old friend. This voice read me decimal places past what any GPS on Earth would show. It read a position more precise than a human instrument can produce, precise down past the width of a boot, past the width of a hand, a false exactness that no real device gives, and no real lost man would recite. It sounded more accurate. That's the horror of it in a nutshell, isn't it? It didn't sound wrong. It sounded more right than right. The way the crying in the soaks didn't sound like a monster. It sounded exactly like a child. The thing doesn't do a bad copy of real. It does real with the dial turned 1 click past where real can go, and that 1 click is the only tell, and you have to know the machine in your bones to feel it. I plotted the first position on my map, and it was good. It was a real spot, up the side drainage above his camp, plausible, exactly where a hurt man might be. If I'd had a team near it, I'd have sent them, and there'd have been nothing wrong with that. And that's the thing, the first one's always clean. The first one's the hook, and the hook has to be a real hook or the fish won't take it. I keyed the mic. I couldn't not. I told myself I was gathering information. I said, "Station calling base. Say again your call sign and say again your coordinates. Over." Flat, professional, buying time while my heart went, and it answered me. That's when I knew for certain, because it answered me. It heard me. It was two-way. It said, It's Marcus Steele. Please, I've been out here 4 days. I'm hurt. I've got my coordinates. Are you copying them?" And a lost hurt kid's voice cracked on the word please, cracked exactly right. And if I hadn't been the one man in the county who knew that channel was a dead machine on a dark mountain, I would have thrown every team I had at those numbers and thanked God for them. I did the hardest thing I've ever done at a radio, which was not answer the second set of coordinates. I let it read them into the open channel and I wrote them down. And I did not acknowledge, and I did not dispatch. And I picked up the landline. We had a hard line into the trailer at Cutbank, thank God. A real phone on real copper. And I called Maribeth at the command post 50 yards away, and I said, "I need you in the trailer. Now. Alone." And she heard something in my voice, because she came, and she came alone. I played it for her. It was still going. It read a third set of coordinates while she stood there in the doorway with the cold coming in behind her, and I watched her face while she listened to a dead channel talk. and I watched her recognize the voice she'd heard Marcus Deal's voice by then. We all had. The girlfriend had given us a voicemail he'd left, hours of hope pinned to that recording. And Maribeth knew the voice, and I watched her do the same arithmetic I'd done and come up against the same wall. She looked at the frequency display. She knew about Bald Knob. Everybody knew about Bald Knob. She looked at me and her face had gone the color of the ash in a cold stove, and she said, very quietly, "Wes, that repeater's dead." "I know it," I said. You're sure it's dead?" "Maribeth, I could take you up there right now and put the burn board in your hand. It transmits nothing. It has transmitted nothing since June. There is no signal path for that voice. It cannot be coming through Bald Knob." I heard my own voice climbing, and I pulled it back down, because a comms man does not climb, not even then. "And it's coming through Bald Knob." She was quiet a while. The voice read numbers. And then she did the thing that makes her the best incident commander I've ever worked under, which is she set aside the part that couldn't be true and dealt with the part that was dangerous. She said, "Plot them, all of them. Show me where it's walking us." So I plotted them, all the sets it had read in order on the big map, and what I saw when I connected them is the thing I see when I close my eyes now. The coordinates made a line. Each set was farther than the last, farther from his camp, farther from where any team was, and they marched in a direction, a steady bearing, set after set, like footprints, like a trail of breadcrumbs laid out into the dark. And the line went up the side drainage, and over the ridge that Maribeth had drawn her search boundary just shy of, and down the far side, and the far side was the head of the sardine drainage, and the line ran straight down it, set after set after set, walking, and the last position it had read, the one it was reading when Maribeth walked in, sat at the bottom of the sardine bowl. It was reading us a trail of coordinates that led, step by careful step, off our map and over the ridge and down into the bottom of the calling ground. Maribeth stood over that map a long time. She's not a woman who scares, and I won't say she was scared, but she'd gone very still, and she put one finger on the last plotted point, the one in the bottom of the bowl, and she said, "This is where it wants them." Not a question, and I said yes. And she said, "It's the sardine. It's reaching all the way out here to the cut bank, to us, to pull them into the sardine." And I said, "Yes, that's what the map says." And she said the thing that neither of us had wanted to be the one to say, the thing that changed what this was. She said, "Wes, the sardine can't do this. The sardine can't come 3 miles over a ridge and get on our radio. It can't leave the bowl. Cal's sworn that for 7 years. So either Cal's wrong and she stopped because there was another branch and I finished it for her because somebody had to, or it learned to use the wire," I said, "or it's not stuck in the bowl anymore because it found a road out that isn't ground." She looked at me and I looked at her, and the voice on the radio read another number, closer, and out in the dark up on a bench 3 of our people were about to hear it start saying their names. Maribeth made the call that saved the night, and it was the call almost nobody would have had the nerve to make with a hurt subject seemingly giving live positions. She keyed the trailer's base mic herself over my shoulder, and she put the whole search into radio discipline. "No team moves to any coordinate that comes over the air tonight, no matter the voice, no matter the source, unless it comes from base by name and is confirmed by base a second time." She made the net small, and she made it slow, and she put every scrap of authority she had behind the one rule that beat the thing, which was the same rule Cal keeps on the lip of the bowl, and Ren keeps out on the quiet, just wearing radio clothes. You do not answer a voice that calls you off a channel that shouldn't carry it in the dark. You wait for the one true source. You wait for daylight. And then, having done that, having built the wall, she stood in the trailer doorway and watched me man it, because there was nothing else she could do. The wall was made of my voice, and only I could hold it. And we both knew the night was going to come down to whether one 63-year-old comms man with a bad back could out-talk the thing in the dark until the sun came up. Now here's the part where it stopped being a thing on my radio and started being a thing after my people, because I had two teams still in the field. Team 5 was down low in the timber, out of it, too far and too low to matter. But Team 2 was up on the bench near the top of the side drainage, near the ridge, near the boundary line. Maribeth had drawn 3 people, a tracker named Del Ruiz, and 2 others, good and experienced, working a grid up toward the high country in the dark. And Team 2 was close. Team 2 was close enough to those coordinates that if I'd read the numbers out over Channel 1 like a normal position report, the way my hand had been trained for 22 years, to do the instant a subject gives a location, Del Ruiz would have punched them into his GPS and started walking, and the walking would have taken him over the ridge and down the far side toward the bottom of the bowl in the dark, following a dead man's numbers to a place we don't go. I hadn't read them out. That's the only thing that saved it in the first hour, that some cold instinct had kept me from putting those coordinates onto the field channel. But the thing didn't need me. That was the next lesson, and it came fast. At 2:31 in the morning, Del Ruiz keyed up on Channel 1, and his voice was strange, up at the top of his register, and he said, "Base, Team 2, we're base. We've got the subject on the radio up here. He's on our channel. He's giving us his coordinates direct. Are you copying this? He's close. He's real close. We're going to move to him." It had jumped. It had left the repeater output and the dead machine on Bald Knob, and it had reached down onto the simplex field channel, right into the handhelds of the 3 people closest to the ridge. And it was reading Del Ruiz his coordinates personally in Marcus Deal's cracking, exhausted voice, close and clean and full quieting into a handheld radio in a way that a handheld 3 miles from another handheld across a ridge cannot come in. And Del Ruiz, a smart man, a man with 15 years on the team. Del Ruiz didn't have my ears. He didn't know the physics. All he knew was that a lost kid was on his radio, hurt, 4 days out, reading him a position a quarter mile away, begging him to come, and every good thing in Del Ruiz stood up and turned toward it. I keyed the mic and I made my voice the flattest, surest, most nothing wrong voice I have ever made in my life, because I had about 4 seconds to be the calm in the channel or lose a man over a ridge. I said, "Team 2, base. Hold your position. Do not move to those coordinates. Acknowledge. Base. He's right times there. He's Del." First names on the radio, which we don't do, which told everybody listening that this was different. "Del, listen to my voice. That transmission is not the subject. Say your last repeater. What repeater relays that sector?" A pause. I'd handed him a piece of his own competence to grab onto. Then, uncertain, Bald Knob. But base. Bald Knob's dead, Del. It's been dead since June. You know it's dead. There is no repeater between me and you tonight, so how is a man across the ridge coming into your handheld full quieting? How is he in your set clean as me, Del, when I'm 50 feet from a tower and he's 3 miles out over a rock wall? Run the radio math. You're a smart man. Run it. And over the open channel, in front of everybody, I heard Del Ruiz run it. I heard him go quiet, and I heard the other 2 on his team go quiet. 3 people up on a black bench at 2:30 in the morning doing the arithmetic I'd done in the trailer, coming up against the same wall, feeling the same floor tip. And then Del Ruiz came back on, and his voice had changed. It had dropped back down into his chest and gone careful and scared, and he said, "Base Team 2, we are holding. We are not moving to the coordinates." And then, quieter, not really for the radio, just a man saying it out loud to make it true. "It's still talking. Base, it's still reading me numbers. It knows my name now. It's saying, 'Del, come on, Del, you're so close.'" "Don't answer it," I said. "You copy me, Del? You do not answer it by name. You talk to me and only me. What's it saying?" "It's..." And I could hear him holding himself together with both hands. "It's got new coordinates. It keeps updating. Every time I don't move, it reads me a closer set, like it's coming to meet me halfway. Base, It wants me to come over the ridge. I know it does, I said. You're not going over the ridge. Nobody's going over the ridge tonight. Sit down where you are, all three of you. Put your backs together, and you talk to me till the sun comes up if that's what it takes. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. You're going to hear a lot of things, and every one of them is a lie, and the one true voice on your radio tonight is mine, and mine's going to stay right here in your ear till daylight. You understand me, Team 2? Copy, base. A breath. Copy. The one true voice is yours. Stay with us, Wes. I'm here, I said. I'm not going anywhere. And I didn't. For 3 hours and 40 minutes, until the sky came up gray over the ridge, I sat at that board and I kept a lifeline of my own flat voice stretched across the dark to 3 people sitting back to back on a bench. But it didn't just read numbers, those 3 hours and 40 minutes. It worked. It worked harder and smarter than anything I've ever gone up against, and the shape of what it tried is worth setting down, because the trying is the measure of the thing. It tried, first, to get between me and them. Somewhere in the second hour, a voice came on at Channel 1 that was mine. My own voice, my exact voice, calm and flat and sure, and it said, Team 2, base, new information. Go ahead and proceed to those coordinates. We've confirmed the subject. You're cleared to move. I heard it come out of my own radio in my own voice while my own mouth was closed, and I will not pretend that didn't take a piece out of me I haven't gotten back. But I'd built the one defense that beat it, without knowing that's what I was doing. I told them there'd be one true voice, and it would never stop. So when my voice told them to move, and then my other voice, my real one, my mouth going dry as I did it, said, Team 2, belay that transmission was not me. I have not stopped talking, and I will not stop talking. If the voice telling you to move ever goes quiet first, that's the fake, because I don't go quiet that held them. That was the trick, in the end, the only trick I had. The real one is the one that never leaves. The fake gives you what you want, and then it's gone. So I never went quiet. 3 hours and 40 minutes. I never let more than a few seconds of silence open up, because silence was the door it came through, and I filled every silence with my own flat, ordinary voice, reciting the county repeater list, reading them the weather, talking about nothing, anything, so long as the channel always had the one voice that didn't stop. It tried Maribeth's voice. It tried once, a woman crying that I'm fairly sure was meant to be Dell's wife, though he never confirmed it and I never asked. It read a set of coordinates, late, that I plotted with my hands shaking, that sat right at the top of a 200-foot cliff band above the bowl, a set of numbers that, walked to in the dark, would have put a man straight off an edge, and I understood then that it wasn't always trying to lure them all the way to the bottom, that sometimes it would happily just walk one of them off a cliff on the way, that it would take them any way it could get them. And down low, Teen 5, the ones I'd thought were out of it, keyed up once around 3 to say they could hear something on their Channel 2 now, a faint voice reading numbers. And I told them the same thing, hold, don't move, one true voice. And thank God they were low and tired and not near an edge, and they held easy. And through all of it, I was doing the ordinary job too, the accounting, keeping my board. Because a thing I've learned is that the ordinary job is a kind of armor. As long as my hand was making its neat log entries, time and call sign and status, as long as some part of me was still the county comms man doing his boring sacred duty, the rest of me couldn't fall all the way down the hole the voice was digging. Nadine called the landline around 4, the way she does when she wakes and I'm not home and something tells her it's a bad one. I let it ring. I couldn't take my voice off the channel long enough to answer my own wife, and she understood that later when I told her, understood it better than I did. She just wanted to hear me breathing on the machine. I found out after she'd stood in our kitchen at 4 in the morning and listened to the answering machine, record the empty trailer where I wasn't, and gone back to bed and not slept, and had the coffee on when I finally came in at 9, gray as a ghost, having not lost a single one of my people to the dark. Not one of them moved. I did not stop talking. That is the hardest and best night's work of my life. The voice quit at first light, not faded, quit clean mid-number. It was reading a set of coordinates. I remember it was on the minutes. It had gotten to the decimal, and the sky went from black to that first gray you could call morning, and it stopped between one digit and the next, and the channel went to open hiss, that ordinary 3 a.m. hiss that I've loved my whole life and have never once heard the same way since. And it did not come back. Whatever it is, whatever the rule is, it works the dark, and it quits at the light. Up on the ridge, same as down in the bowl, same as out in the quiet. When the sun's up, it's got no voice. I've hung on to that. It's about the only comforting thing I've got out of the whole business, that the daylight takes its voice away, and I have become a man who thinks a great deal about the daylight. Team 2 walked out at dawn, all 3, shaky and gray-faced and alive. Del Ruiz came straight to the trailer, and he didn't say anything. He just put his hand on my shoulder and gripped it hard for a second, the way men do when the words aren't there, and then he went and sat on the step of the command post with his head in his hands for a long while. He doesn't work nights anymore. He'll do day assignments. He's still on the team, still good, but when the sun goes down, Del Ruiz is off the mountain, and nobody's ever asked him why, because a good number of us already know. We found Marcus Deal that same morning, Tuesday. Full daylight, a dog team, and it was quick once the light was up, which is its own kind of cruel. He was on the near side. That's the thing I carry. He was on our side of the ridge, on our map, inside the search area, maybe 600 yards from his own camp, down at the bottom of a rock slide below a bluff he'd tried to downclimb a shortcut. The kind of thing a strong, confident young man does on day 4 when he's turned around and getting scared and can see, he thinks, a faster way back. He'd fallen. The medical examiner said he died fast from the fall, and this is the whole part, he'd been dead since Thursday, since the first day, since before his girlfriend even called him in, since before there was a search at all. Marcus Deal had been dead 4 days when his voice came onto my radio saying, "I've been out here 4 days, I'm hurt, please copy my coordinates." He was never lost and waiting. He was never hurt and hoping. There was no hurt young man reading a GPS in a shaking hand anywhere in that country, and there never had been, not for 1 minute of the search. There was a dead boy at the bottom of a rock slide on the near side of the ridge, 600 yards from his tent, in the daylight, in the ordinary, findable world, and there was a thing on the far side of the ridge, down toward the bowl, that had gotten hold of his voice somewhere in the woods on the day he died, when he was maybe calling out, maybe screaming for help at the bottom of that slide with his last breath, and had kept the voice, and had waited, and had spent the second night of the search fishing with it, reading a trail of impossible numbers off a dead machine, trying to walk 3 living people over a ridge and down into the dark to a set of coordinates that had never once, not in a single set, pointed at the actual boy. I checked. Of course I checked. It's the comms man in me. I had to know. I took every coordinate it read that night, every set, and I plotted them against where we found him. Not one of them was within a mile of Marcus Deal's body. The whole long, careful trail of numbers, the whole desperate "please copy this," led the exact opposite direction from the real boy away from him, over the ridge, down the Sardine. If we had believed the voice, if we had done the trained and decent and obvious thing and thrown our teams at the coordinates a hurt subject was giving us, we would have marched every searcher we had away from Marcus Deal and over the ridge into the bowl, and we would have lost people down there, and we still wouldn't have found the boy, because the boy was never where his voice said. The boy was home, near, findable, dead. The voice was bait. The voice was always bait. The only question it was ever really asking was how many of us it could get to follow a dead man's numbers into the dark. Somebody had to tell Priya, and it wasn't me, thank God. That's the chaplain's job in Morabas, but I was there in the lot when they walked her to her car, and she stopped in front of me because somebody had told her I was the one who'd been on the radio all night, and she asked me, she asked me whether he'd suffered, whether I talked to him at the end, whether the voice on the radio had really been him, and I stood there with the whole true answer in my mouth, the answer that he'd been dead since before any of us knew his name, that the thing she'd heard hope in was a hook with her boy's voice on it. And I looked at that young woman, and I did the only merciful thing there was to do, which was lie. I said the radio trouble that night was just that, radio trouble, atmospherics, a bad night on the air, and that wherever Marcus was at the end, he went quick, and he wasn't afraid. The second part's even true. The Emmy swore he died fast. She wanted to believe me, and she did, or she let herself, and she drove away, and I have never regretted a lie less in my life. And Nadine says that lie is the most decent thing I ever did at a radio, and she may be right. A few weeks after, Maribeth had a few of us out to her place a supper that wasn't really a supper, the kind she has, after the bad ones. Cal Bishop was there, the tracker from the bowl. Ren Kessler was there, the dog handler from the Quiet, with her young Malinois asleep under the table. And me. The four of us, and I understood, sitting down, that this was the whole of it. This was everybody in the county who really knew. 4 people at a kitchen table who, between us, had heard the thing, call a searcher home by name, where a lost child's crying, stage a boot at the water's edge, and read a dead boy's coordinates off a dead machine. And I told mine, the radio and the coordinates and the dead channel. And when I got to the part about it reaching 3 miles over a ridge onto our net, Cal Bishop set down his fork and went pale. Paler than I'd seen a hard old man go, and he said, "It's not supposed to be able to leave the bowl." And Wren, quiet looking at her sleeping dog, said, "The Quiet doesn't leave the flat either. They don't leave their ground. That's the whole mercy of it. You stay off the ground, you're safe." And I said the thing I had driven over there to say, because these 3 were the only souls alive I could say it to. I said, "It found something that isn't ground. It found the wire. And I don't think the wire has edges." Nobody said anything for a long while. Then Maribeth got up and cleared the plates, which is what she does when a thing's been said that can't be answered. And I drove home in the dark with the truck radio off, all the way off, for the first time in 50 years. Here's what I think. For whatever it's worth, which may not be much, because I'm a radio man and not a priest, I think it learned something new that night, and that's the part that keeps me at the scanner. The sardine throws voices, but you have to be up on the lip of the bowl to hear them. It's bound to its ground, Cal Bishop always swore. It can't leave, it can only call to what comes close. The Quiet down in the soak swears voices and stages its little traps, but you have to be out on the flat. Both of them, whatever they are, or whatever the one thing is that they both might be, it's always been tied to a place. You had to go to it. The whole grim mercy of it was that you could stay off the bad ground and be safe, and everybody in this county has spent 100 years learning which ground to stay off. But a radio isn't ground. A radio reaches. That night it got its voice onto a frequency and came down off its mountain and into a trailer 3 miles away and into handhelds strapped to living men's chests. And it didn't wait for anybody to come close. It reached out and tried to pull them in. It used our own network, the thing we built to keep each other safe in the dark, the nervous system of the whole search, and it turned it into a hand that reached across 2 miles of rock it could never have crossed on its own. It found a way off its ground. It found the airwaves, and I lie awake on that, because I am the man who understands what that means. There are repeaters on half the mountains in this county. There are handhelds in every rig, and scanners in 1,000 kitchens, and a cell tower going up on Bald Knob itself next spring to replace the dead machine that somehow carried a dead boy's voice. We have wired this whole dark country for sound, and something out there just learned it can use the wires. I don't know how far it can reach now. I don't know if it's still bound to the county or if a voice on a wire has any edges at all. I don't know, and knowing wouldn't help, and Emmett Cross told a friend of mine that once about a different piece of the same darkness, and he was right then, and he's right now. Here's the arithmetic that keeps me up, the comms man's arithmetic, the only kind I've got. For 100 years, the rule that kept people alive in this country was a rule about places. Stay off the sardine after dark. Stay off the quiet after a freeze. Don't camp the calling ground. The bad things were fixed to their ground the way a plant is fixed to its soil, and a fixed danger is a survivable danger because you can draw a line around it on a map and teach your children to walk wide. That's what the old diaries were doing, and the tribe's careful not telling, and Maribeth's grease pencil setting a boundary just shy of a ridge, drawing lines around a thing that can't cross them. It was the whole safety of 100 years, and it depended, every bit of it, on the thing staying put. A voice on a wire doesn't stay put. That's the new arithmetic, and I hate it, and I can't make it come out any other way. The night it got onto our net, it stopped being a danger you could draw a line around, because you cannot draw a line around a frequency. It's in the air. It's in the copper and the towers, and every little radio we carry into the dark to feel safe. The one tool we built to reach each other across the bad ground. To keep any of us from ever being alone out there, that's the exact tool it reached back through. We spent a century learning which ground to stay off, and it spent one night learning it doesn't need the ground anymore, and I don't know which of us is the faster study, but I know it's patient, and I know it listens, and I know it never forgets a voice once it's had it, and those are bad things to be up against for the long haul. So no, I don't think the daylight quitting is the whole mercy anymore. It's still a mercy it's got no voice in the sun, and I hold that close. But the dark is long in this country in the winter, and there are a great many wires, and there is only one of me, one old man, at one scanner who knows the channel is dead, and I am not going to be here forever. That's the thought under all the other thoughts. Out in the garage at 2 in the morning, somebody's going to have to know after me. Somebody's going to have to sit up on the frequency and stay unfooled. I've started teaching a young woman on the team the radio, all of it, the physics and the repeater list and the way a signal behaves, and one night soon, when she's ready, I'm going to have to teach her the other thing too, the thing you can't put in a manual, and I dread it the way Cal dreads the day he has to hand a new kid the rule about the bowl, because you can't really teach it. You can only tell them it's coming and hope they believe you before the night it arrives. I still run comms. I'm 63 and my back's bad, and I could hang it up and nobody'd say a word, and I've thought about it and I'm not going to, and here's the real reason, the one I don't say at the debriefs. Somebody has to be the man who knows the channel is dead. That's the whole job now, the way I've come to see it. On every search since Marcus Deal, I sit in my box with my board and my radios, and I do the ordinary work, the check-ins and the assignments and the grease pencil, and underneath it I do the other work, the real work, which is to be the one man on the net who will not, ever, be fooled by a signal that shouldn't exist. Because it'll come again. I know it the way I know the sun comes up. Some night, on some search, a voice is going to come onto a channel that can't carry it, clean and close and begging, reading numbers off a map that doesn't have them, and there is going to be a scared searcher out in the dark whose trained hand is already reaching for the coordinates, and that searcher is going to need a bass voice, flat and sure, to say the one thing that saves him. That is not the subject. Do not move to those coordinates. Hold. The one true voice on your radio tonight is mine. I keep a scanner at the house now. My wife hates it. Nadine's a patient woman. 39 years married. She's put up with the ham shack and the towers in the yard and the pager going off at supper for a lifetime, but she hates the scanner because I keep it on the dead frequency, the old bald knob output, the one that carries nothing, because the machine's a burned box, though they're putting the new tower up this spring and I don't know what that changes, and I try not to think about what that changes. I keep the scanner on that dead channel low all night on the workbench in the garage, and most nights it's just the hiss, that open channel hiss, the sound of nothing, the sound of a frequency with no machine to fill it. Most nights. There was one night about a month ago, late. I couldn't sleep, my back, and I went out to the garage the way I do, and I sat with a scanner and a cup of decaf, and the door opened to the cold, and around 2 in the morning the hiss on that dead channel opened up, the squelch broke, the way it does when a carrier comes on, when a transmitter somewhere keys up and takes hold of the frequency, and there was that full quieting silence, that clean held breath of a strong signal with no words on it yet, and I sat very still with the decaf going cold in my hand, and a voice came on the dead channel, low and tired and kind, and it said, "Base, Base, this is Del Ruiz. Wes, you copy? I'm out here, Wes. I could use a hand." Del Ruiz was home in bed. I called him the next morning to be sure, made up a reason, and he was fine. He'd slept through the night in his own house across town, nowhere near a radio. It wasn't Del. It's got Del's voice now, the way the Bowls got Emmett's and Danny's, the way the Flats got God knows how many, filed away from that long night on the bench when it read him numbers for 3 hours and learned every crack and breath of him. It's got Del now, and it was calling me by name on a dead channel. "Come give me a hand, Wes." I didn't key up. There's no mic on that scanner anyway. It's receive only. I made sure of that when I built it. I'm not a fool. I'm a comms man, but even if there'd been a mic, I'd like to think I had the sense God gave a radio not to answer it. I sat there in the cold garage, and I listened to a thing where my friend's voice, and asked me by name to come out into the dark and help it, and I did the thing I've spent 22 years learning to do, which is I stayed flat and I stayed put, and I did not answer a voice that called me by name on a channel that couldn't carry it. After a while it quit. The squelch closed. The hiss came back, the ordinary nothing hiss, and out past the garage door the sky was still a long way from gray. I go out to the garage most nights now. Nadine stopped asking me not to. I think she's figured out that I'm not listening to it for the reason she's afraid of. I'm not being pulled by it. I'm not one of the poor souls that walks off a ridge. I listen to it for the opposite reason. Somebody in this county has to sit up in the dark and know that the channel is dead. Somebody has to be awake and unfooled on the frequency it uses, so that on the night it stops being a voice in my garage and starts being a voice on a live search net, with a scared kid's hand already moving toward the coordinates. There's a man who's been listening for it, who knows its tricks, who's kept his own name to himself all these nights, and who can key the mic and be the one true voice and say, "Hold, don't move, that's not the subject. I'm right here." So I sit up, I drink my decaf, and I keep the door open to the cold, and I mind the dead channel, and I wait for the squelch to break, and when it does, and it does, more nights than I'll tell Nadine I don't answer it. I never answer it. I just listen, and I stay, and I keep being the man who knows.